The autumn wind bit at my face as I pushed through the back door of Rosie's diner. My 12-hour shift had finally ended, but instead of relief, my body felt like a crumbling structure about to collapse. My feet ached in the cheap pair of shoes I had picked up from a clearance rack last month, their soles already thinning. I drew my jacket tighter around myself, though the thin fabric did little against Chicago's unforgiving November chill. Behind me, the familiar clang of plates and the rush of dishwater filled the kitchen. "See you tomorrow, Claire," Marco called, his voice muffled by the chaos of closing time. I lifted a hand in reply without turning around. Exhaustion weighed heavier than politeness. The alley reeked of fryer grease and old garbage. The smell so constant it clung to my hair and skin after years of working here. Tonight, though, even the familiar stench could not distract me from the arithmetic of survival running relentlessly in my head. Tips had been pitiful, just $18 for an entire shift of plastered-on smiles, endless coffee refills, and rehearsed lines of, "Can I get you anything else, hun?" $18 that had to stretch between groceries, bus fare, and the ever-looming threat of rent. If I had been able to catch the bus home, perhaps it would not have felt so hopeless, but the last one had left at 11:30. I had no choice but to walk 20 minutes in the cold. It was the invisible tax of being poor, of not having the luxury to buy time or comfort. I pulled my jacket tighter, hunching against the wind, and began the long trudge down Westfield Avenue. The street was a graveyard of shuttered storefronts, their windows dark, their signs faded. Only the 24-hour pharmacy on the corner held a dim beacon of light. Every flicker of the street lamps cast long, sinister shadows across the cracked sidewalk, and my thoughts drifted between hunger and dread. Could I skip tomorrow's lunch to save enough for winter boots? Would my roommate be angry again if I fell behind on utilities? My gaze snagged on something unusual ahead. Between a parked sedan and a battered mailbox, a small bundle lay crumpled on the sidewalk. At first glance, it seemed like a discarded bag of clothes, left behind by someone moving in haste. But then, a flash of red caught my eye, a coat. A child's coat. Too fine, too clean, too out of place for this neighborhood. I slowed, suspicion warring with concern. The bundle shifted slightly in the wind, but it was not the wind alone. My heart dropped as recognition struck. It was a little girl. "Hey," I called, my voice rising as I hurried forward. "Are you all right?" No answer. She lay motionless, her small body curled in on itself, dark braids framing a pale face. She could not have been older than 8. Her school uniform peeked from beneath that pristine red coat, the gold buttons glinting faintly beneath the streetlight. Kneeling beside her, I pressed a trembling hand to her cheek. Her skin was cool, but not lifeless. Her chest rose faintly, she was breathing. Relief crashed into me, followed quickly by panic. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" I whispered, tapping her cheek lightly. Her eyelids fluttered, but did not open. There was no blood, no visible injury, only unconsciousness. I looked up and down the street, empty. The pharmacy was 3 blocks away, too far to carry a child in this condition. I thought of dialing emergency services, but the words from countless late-night crime documentaries echoed in my mind. Children do not collapse alone on dark sidewalks unless there is more to the story. As my eyes swept over her, I noticed the glint of something inside her pocket. A phone. A sleek, expensive model I could never dream of affording, its rhinestone-studded case sparkling faintly under the streetlight. My hands hesitated for only a second before pulling it free. The lock screen offered no help, but the emergency contact button glowed at the bottom. One name appeared. Just one word. "Papa?" I pressed it with shaking fingers. The line barely rang before a voice answered, deep and accented, commanding without effort. "Aria." The sound of that single name sent a shiver down my spine. It was not shouted, it was not frantic. It was steady, edged with authority, so sharp it made my heart race. Italian, I thought, though there was something heavier than an accent in it. Power. I stammered. "This is not Aria. My name is Claire Morgan." I found a little girl collapsed on Westfield Avenue, near Rosie's diner. She is breathing, but she will not wake up. I think she might be your daughter. Silence. So complete I thought the call had dropped, my breath caught in my throat. Then, at last, the voice returned, clipped and cold. Is she breathing? Yes, I whispered, but weakly. I was going to call an ambulance. No ambulance. The words cut through mine like a knife. No police. Do not move her. I am coming. Stay where you are. But she needs medical. I am bringing a doctor. Do not call anyone else. Do not move her. The voice shifted away, muffled, as if he had turned from the phone. Get the car, now, and call Dr. Cole. Then, sharp and precise, he returned. Where exactly? My mouth was dry. On Westfield, near Rosie's, about a block east of the old bookstore. Between a blue sedan and a mailbox. 7 minutes, he said. Keep her warm. If anyone approaches, call me again immediately. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, its screen fading to black, my own reflection staring back, wide-eyed and pale. What kind of father forbade calling an ambulance for his unconscious daughter? The authority in his voice lingered in my ears like the echo of a loaded gun cocking. I stripped off my thin jacket, draping it over the child. It was not much, but it was all I had. Her wrist glinted with a slim gold bracelet engraved with her name, and a crest I did not recognize. Aria Moretti. I whispered it silently, committing it to memory. Minutes dragged like hours. My hand remained on her wrist, counting her pulse again and again, terrified it might falter. My breath misted in the frigid air as I glanced down the street every few seconds, nerves stretched taut. At last, the glow of headlights sliced through the darkness. Not the weak yellow of an ordinary car, but the blinding white glare of luxury LEDs. A black SUV approached slowly, predatory, deliberate. My chest constricted. It stopped directly in front of us. The engine went silent. The rear door opened first. A man emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his overcoat tailored to perfection. It was not his clothes that froze me, it was his presence. Space bent around him as if even the night was forced to yield. His eyes swept the street once before locking onto me, piercing and absolute. A scar ran along his jaw, so precise it looked deliberate, a signature etched into flesh. Another man exited the driver's side, enormous, scanning the area with soldier-like vigilance. A third followed with a medical bag, but I barely saw him. My eyes could not leave the first man. Arya, he said, and the name carried weight like a prayer. He knelt without hesitation, the concrete beneath his immaculate coat of no consequence. The air shifted around him, heavy with sandalwood and something sharper, metallic. His hands, large and steady, brushed his daughter's face, his expression transforming. The hardness melted into something raw, almost painful in its intensity. I swallowed hard, forcing words past the lump in my throat. I found her like this. She has not woken up. His eyes flicked to mine. For one terrifying second, I felt stripped bare, every flaw, every desperation I had ever hidden exposed. Then, as if I were dismissed, his focus returned to the child. The doctor dropped to his knees, working swiftly, murmuring about glucose levels and insulin. Within moments, color returned to Arya's cheeks. Her lashes fluttered, and her gaze found her father. "Papa," she whispered, "I am sorry. I forgot to eat after ballet." The relief that surged through him was almost unbearable to watch. He cradled her to his chest, whispering in Italian, his voice breaking with tenderness. "Piccola mia, my little one. He rose smoothly, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Then his gaze met mine again, deliberate this time. "You found my daughter." "Yes, I managed. I was walking home from work. My name is Claire Morgan." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You work at the diner." I nodded, trembling. "Thank you," he said. "I do not forget debts." Before I could respond, the driver gestured for me to follow. My breath caught as the stranger carried his daughter back to the SUV. For just an instant, the edge of his coat shifted, revealing the unmistakable bulge of a holstered gun. And with that, I knew my life had just irrevocably changed. The sound of the SUV's engine lingered in my ears long after it disappeared into the night. I walked home in a daze, my thin jacket doing little against the cold, my thoughts consumed by the image of that man and the unconscious child in his arms. By the time I reached the crumbling brick of Parkview Apartments, my legs felt heavy, each step weighted with questions I could not answer. The stairwell smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew. I climbed slowly, the chill seeping into my bones. My apartment door stuck as usual, and when it finally gave way with a reluctant groan, I stepped into the dimly lit living room. Megan was sprawled across the threadbare couch, her casino uniform still clinging to her body, her makeup smudged from the late shift. She looked up as I entered, her dark eyes narrowing at the sight of me. "Claire," she said, sitting up. "You look like you just saw a ghost. What happened?" I hesitated, the words burning at the back of my throat. Megan was my closest friend, the only family I had in this city, but saying his name out loud felt dangerous, like invoking something too powerful. Finally, I dropped my purse onto the floor and sat heavily beside her. "I found a little girl on the street tonight. She collapsed. I called the emergency contact on her phone. Her father came." Megan raised an eyebrow, her curiosity sharp. And it was Damien Moretti. The name slipped from my lips like a confession. The coffee mug in Megan's hand froze halfway to her mouth. She blinked, once, twice, her expression shifting from confusion to something far darker. "Claire, please tell me you are joking." I wish I was. My voice shook. "He showed up with men, a doctor. He told me not to call the police, not to call an ambulance. He knew my name, Megan. He looked at me like he already knew everything about me." Megan set the mug down so quickly it sloshed over the edge, coffee dripping onto the table. Her hands trembled slightly. "Do you even realize who Damien Moretti is? He is not just some rich guy. He owns half the lakefront. Every casino, every shipping yard, every luxury restaurant has his fingerprints on it. He is Mafia, Claire, the kind of mafia people whisper about and then pretend they never said anything." I buried my face in my hands. I could not just leave the girl there. She was 8 years old. She needed help. No one is blaming you for helping a child. Megan's tone softened for a moment, then hardened again. "But you need to understand, a man like Moretti does not just appear and then vanish. If his eyes are on you now, you will not shake them off. He does not let go of debts. He collects them." Her words struck me like stones. I lay awake that night on our lumpy mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, hearing his voice in the silence. "You found my daughter. I do not forget debts." By morning, my exhaustion felt like a heavy cloak. I forced myself through my routine, pulling on the faded uniform that smelled faintly of grease no matter how many times I washed it. Rosie's diner awaited, and Bills did not care that I had crossed paths with the most dangerous man in Chicago. The bell above the diner door jingled as I entered. The familiar scent of bacon grease and burnt coffee filled my nose. Customers hunched in booths, their tired faces blurring into the monotony of 1,000 mornings before. I tied my apron around my waist, pasted on the smile I had worn like armor for years, and began pouring coffee. But my hands would not stop trembling. Every time the bell over the door rang, my chest tightened, expecting to see his shadow filling the doorway. My eyes flicked constantly to the windows. My nerves pulled taut. Rosie noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You all right, honey?" she asked as I mopped up a spilled drink with shaking hands. "You look like you have seen trouble." "Just a rough night," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "I will be fine." But I was not fine. Time crawled. Each tick of the clock dragged me closer to something I could not name, something inevitable. By evening, my nerves were frayed raw. At exactly 8 o'clock, just as I was untying my apron, the bell chimed again. A man entered. He was not Damien, but the resemblance in aura was unmistakable. Tall, broad expression carved from stone, eyes that scanned every corner of the diner before settling on me. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice low, polite but implacable. "The car is waiting." "Mr. Moretti would like to see you." The tray in my hands clattered against the counter. Conversation stuttered around us as patrons glanced up, sensing something out of place. Rosie raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her silence louder than words. My breath came uneven, my pulse hammering. Megan's warnings rang in my ears. Once you are in his sights, you cannot walk away. I set the tray down slowly and nodded. All right. The man led me outside. Parked at the curb was another black SUV, its polished surface gleaming beneath the streetlight. The rear door opened with a soft click, revealing leather seats and the faint scent of sandalwood. And there he was, Damien Moretti. He sat as if the car were his throne. Dressed not in a suit this time, but a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. Even without the trappings of wealth, authority radiated from him like heat from a fire. His dark eyes lifted to mine, and once again I felt stripped bare, my entire life laid out for him to examine. Claire Morgan, he said, savoring my name with deliberate precision. You found my daughter last night. She tells me you are her angel. My mouth went dry. I only did what anyone would have done. No, he said, his tone absolute. Most would not have stopped. Fewer still would have stayed. And you did. He leaned back, studying me. Arya trusts you. That is rare. I intend to keep you close. My heart skipped, my body stiffening. What does that mean? It means, he said, his voice smooth and dangerous, that I have a proposal. The SUV pulled away from the curb, the city lights streaking across the tinted glass as we drove north, away from my familiar neighborhood and toward the glittering wealth of the lakefront. My world, the world I thought I knew, fell away behind us. You will not return to your diner after tonight, he continued. You will not spend your nights in a building with locks that do not work and neighbors who could not protect you if they tried. You will come to my house, you will care for Arya. You will ensure she eats when she must, that her blood sugar is checked, that her health is not left to chance. You are studying nursing, yes? Then this is your opportunity to use it. The words struck me harder than any threat could have. His tone was not coaxing, it was not even commanding. It was inevitable, as though the choice had already been made. I cannot just leave my life behind, I whispered. Your classes will continue, he said without hesitation. Your professors will understand. Your tuition will be paid. Your roommate will not suffer. Her rent will be covered. You will live in comfort, work with purpose, and receive compensation beyond what you could earn in 10 years at that diner. In return, you will keep my daughter alive and safe. And the ready tacking of the calf, it was love. His eyes found mine, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. Understand this, Claire, he said softly, though the softness held more weight than iron. Once you step into my world, there is no turning back. The SUV slowed as we turned into a private drive. Ahead loomed an estate that looked less like a home than a fortress, its windows glowing warmly against the darkness, guards standing sentinel at the gates. As the car rolled forward, my heart pounded with the certainty that my life, once small and predictable, had just crossed into something vast and perilous. And as the iron gates closed behind us, I knew there was no way out. The first thing that struck me as the SUV glided up the long drive was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the heavy, watchful quiet of a place that belonged more to shadows than to light. The house emerged from the darkness like a cathedral of stone and glass, its windows glowing with soft gold. At the gates, two men in dark suits stood at attention, their gazes sharp and unyielding. When the vehicle rolled to a stop beneath the grand portico, the door swung open without a word, as if they had been waiting for me all along. Damien stepped out first, his presence commanding without effort. He moved with deliberate precision, every gesture carrying the weight of authority. The driver opened my door, and for a moment I sat frozen. The gulf between my world and his stretching wider than the marble steps before me. Come, Damien said. Just that one word, but it left no room for hesitation. Inside, the air shifted from the biting November cold to warmth infused with polished wood and faint jasmine. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across marble floors so smooth they reflected the world above them. Every corner of the foyer exuded power, from the heavy tapestries to the silent figures posted like statues along the walls. I felt as though I had stepped into another universe. At the foot of the sweeping staircase stood a woman, tall, her figure lean and poised. She wore a fitted black skirt and a blouse buttoned to her throat. Her hair was tied into a perfect bun, her posture rigid as steel. She inclined her head to Damien with professional deference, then let her gaze flick toward me, assessing, measuring. "This is Natalia," Damien said. "She sees everything. She will see you." Before I could reply, a sound broke through the solemn air, a child's laughter, high and bright, echoing down the hallway. My head snapped toward it, and in that moment, Arya appeared. She was dressed in cream silk pajamas, her hair braided neatly, her small feet padding against the floor without a care. "Papa!" The severity of Damien's expression melted. He bent, arms opening as Arya launched herself into them. For the first time, I saw him not as the man whose name whispered fear across the city, but as a father. He gathered her close, one large hand bracing her back, the other cupping the back of her head, as though she were the most fragile treasure in existence. Then Arya's gaze found me. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted in delight. She slipped from her father's arms and ran to me without hesitation. "You came!" she cried, her small arms wrapping around my neck as if she had known me for years. "I told Papa you would." I froze, the warmth of her body against mine, the trust she offered so freely. It disarmed me completely. Slowly, I returned the embrace, my throat tight. "Of course I came," I murmured. Arya leaned back to look at me, her smile radiant. "You are my angel. Papa says so too." Behind her, Damien's voice sharpened. "Arya, bedtime." She pouted, though the defiance lasted only a heartbeat. She released me and stood straighter, as though practicing some lesson of etiquette. "Thank you, Claire," she said solemnly. "I will eat on time, I promise." The weight of her words pressed against my chest. It was not the promise of a child, it felt like a vow. Natalia appeared at her side, extending a hand. Arya slipped her small fingers into it obediently, though she glanced back at me once more before disappearing up the staircase. When she was gone, the silence of the house closed in again, thick and impenetrable. Damien gestured toward a pair of heavy wooden doors, his eyes unreadable. "This way." The study was a room that spoke in low tones of history and power. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with leather-bound books. A fireplace smoldering with carefully arranged logs. A massive desk of dark wood polished to a sheen. The light here was softer, filtered by lamps that cast amber shadows. Damien moved with the ease of a man in command of his domain. He poured amber liquid into a glass and lifted it without offering me one. His gaze flicked to the seat before the desk. "Sit." I obeyed, the leather cold beneath my palms. He sipped once, then set the glass down, his expression calculating. "Last night you stumbled into my world," he said evenly. "Tonight you entered it by choice." "I did not choose this," I said before I could stop myself. His eyes narrowed, though not in anger, "And yet you are here." I clasped my hands in my lap, my voice unsteady. "What do you want from me?" Damien leaned against the desk, his gaze steady, stripping me of defenses. "Arya needs someone she trusts, someone to remind her when she forgets, someone to watch her when I cannot. She trusts you. That is enough for me." I shook my head. "I am still in school. I cannot." "Your classes will not be interrupted," he said smoothly. "Your tuition will be paid. Your roommate will be provided for. You will not want for anything." The generosity was a trap, gilded but inescapable. I swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" A shadow flickered across his face, dark and dangerous, but gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "I will not force you, but if you walk away, know this, you will not walk untouched. My daughter has already chosen you. She will not forget, neither will I." I trembled under the weight of his words. Somewhere, deep inside, I understood the truth. He was not asking. He was binding me with invisible threads, threads spun from gratitude, fear, and something else, something that felt perilously close to fate. The door opened without a knock. Natalia entered carrying a slim black phone and a folder. She placed them on the desk with precise movements. "The device is secure," she said. "The contract will be ready by morning. Dr. Cole is scheduled for 8 o'clock. Damien nodded once. She turned to leave, but not before giving me a look, sharp as glass. It was not hostility. It was warning. When the door closed, Damien's attention returned to me. "You will stay here tonight. Your room is prepared. Natalia will show you." I found my voice, though it came out barely more than a whisper. "My things are at my apartment." "It's a lie." "They will be brought to you," he said, dismissing the concern with a wave. "Make a list. Natalia will handle it." "No," I said quickly. "They are mine. I will pack them myself." For the first time, a faint curve touched his lips. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. "Very well. Tomorrow." He straightened, his presence filling the room. "Go. Rest. Tomorrow, you begin." Natalia appeared once more, as if summoned by his will. She guided me back into the hall, her stride clipped and purposeful. The corridor stretched long, lined with portraits that watched silently as we passed. We reached a door at the far end. She opened it with a key and stepped aside. The room was larger than my entire apartment. A bed covered in white linen, a desk with fresh notebooks and pens, a bathroom gleaming with marble and chrome. The window overlooked manicured gardens, dark now but whispering with unseen life. "This is yours," Natalia said. "If you hear anything in the night, do not open the door. Wait, someone will come." I nodded. She lingered a moment longer, then added quietly, "When you are with Arya, be steady. She needs peace. Do not let her see fear." Her words sank deep, and then she was gone, the door shutting softly behind her. I stood in the silence of the room, staring at the reflection of myself in the glass. The girl who had left the diner hours ago was gone. In her place was someone who had stepped into a world she could neither predict nor control. And as I lay on the bed that night, the weight of marble walls and silent guards pressing in, one thought circled endlessly through my mind. There was no going back. The first morning in the Moretti house felt unreal, as though I had woken up inside someone else's life. Sunlight seeped through the curtains, golden and heavy, illuminating a room far larger than my entire apartment. The bed beneath me was too soft, the sheets too fine, the silence too complete. For a moment, I lay still, caught between dream and reality until memory came crashing back. The SUV, the gates, the scar on Damien's jaw, and the child who had called me her angel. A knock came, soft but firm, before the door eased open. Natalia stepped inside, crisp in her dark suit, not a single strand of hair out of place. Her eyes flicked across the room, sharp and calculating, before they landed on me. "Good morning, Claire," she said, her voice level. "Mr. Moretti requests that you join Arya for breakfast. Afterward, Dr. Cole will arrive." I nodded, still groggy, and she left without another word. I showered quickly, letting the warm water chase away the remnants of exhaustion, and dressed in the clothes that had been left for me in the closet. They were simple but well-made, fitting me too perfectly for coincidence. The idea that someone had known my measurements unsettled me, but there was no time to dwell. The hallway outside was wide, lined with portraits and polished wood. The house breathed power in every detail, yet beneath the surface was an unmistakable sense of watchfulness, as if eyes followed me from every shadow. Natalia led me down the stairs to the dining hall. Arya was already seated at the long table, swinging her legs as she spooned cereal into her mouth. Her smile brightened when she saw me. "Claire, sit here, next to me." At the head of the table sat Damien. He wore a gray suit, the tie loosened slightly, sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms. He looked every bit the man whose name could silence a room, yet his eyes softened when they flicked toward his daughter. Then, inevitably, they turned to me. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. "Good." He gestured toward the plate that had been placed in front of me. "Eggs. toast, fruit, arranged with almost military precision. Check her levels. It took me a moment to realize what he meant. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the glucose monitor and pricked Arya's finger. She winced, but only faintly, accustomed to the routine. The numbers blinked on the screen, steady and within range. Relief eased through me. Damien gave a single nod, and only then did he lift his fork. Breakfast was an odd balance of warmth and tension. Arya chatted about ballet, about a classmate named Sophia who was allowed to walk home alone. But Papa never lets me, she added with a frown. Damien's jaw tightened and his response was firm but quiet, because you are mine. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. Afterward, Natalia reappeared and announced that Dr. Adrian Cole had arrived. We moved to a bright room with tall windows overlooking the gardens. The doctor was a tall man in his 60s, his hair silver but his eyes sharp with intelligence. He smiled as he shook my hand. Claire Morgan, he said warmly. I am Adrian Cole. I have treated Arya since she was 4. I understand you will be her new companion. I nodded nervously. I am still studying nursing, but I will do my best. That is all anyone can ask. He opened a leather folder filled with notes and charts. Arya is strong, but she is at a difficult age. She forgets, she pushes boundaries, and she is active. Your role will be to catch what others might miss. When she is tired, when she is pale, when her energy shifts, you must balance care with trust. Too much control and she will rebel. Too little and she will suffer. His words settled on me with the weight of responsibility. He explained the treatment plan in detail. Insulin injections, diet, emergency protocols. Every word etched itself into my mind, the gravity of the task deepening with each passing moment. When the session ended, Dr. Cole clasped my hand again. She trusts you already. That is rarer than you know. Do not squander it. Damien escorted the doctor out, his low voice carrying instructions I could not hear. When he returned, his eyes locked onto me with sharp intensity. You heard everything, he said. From now on, Arya's health is your responsibility. If she falters because of your neglect, I will not forgive it. I swallowed, my throat dry. I understand. The words were simple, but the truth beneath them pressed hard against my chest. Arya tugged at my hand then, her small fingers curling around mine. Come see my garden, she pleaded, eyes bright. It is huge. You will get lost if you go alone. Her enthusiasm was impossible to resist. She led me through glass doors into the estate's grounds. Manicured hedges stretched like green walls, fountains murmured softly, and statues watched with stony silence. Men in suits moved along the edges of the property, their presence subtle but constant. To Arya, it was a playground. To me, it was a fortress. She showed me her favorite corner, a small patch where flowers bloomed defiantly against the coming cold. This is mine, she said proudly. Papa says nothing here belongs to me, but this is mine. As it bit, I smiled, though the words struck deeper than she could have intended. Later, she pulled me into her study room. Shelves brimmed with books, and on her desk sat a detailed model of a rainforest ecosystem. I won first prize, she declared, her grin wide. She wanted me to marvel at every tree, every animal, crafted with meticulous care, and I did. The pride in her eyes was worth every feigned gasp of amazement. By the time evening fell, I returned to my room, exhausted yet restless. I sat at the desk, staring out the window. Guards patrolled the gardens in steady rhythms, their figures stark against the lights. Beyond the iron gates, the city stretched somewhere unseen, the world I had known receding like a dream. Inside these walls, everything was ordered, protected, controlled. And I, Claire Morgan, had been drawn into it whether by chance, by fate, or by a man whose dark eyes promised safety and danger in equal measure. That night, as I lay beneath the weight of silk sheets, I realized with chilling certainty that my life no longer belonged entirely to me. It belonged in some irrevocable way to the house I now lived in, to the child I now guarded, and to the man who had pulled me across the invisible line into his world. And as the silence closed around me, I knew there was no turning back. The house never truly slept. I learned this during my first full day within its walls. Long after Arya had gone to bed, long after I had retreated to my room, there had been footsteps in the corridors, murmured voices outside the windows, the faint hum of vehicles moving on the private drive. Security, Natalia had called it, watchfulness, but to me it was a reminder that I had stepped into a world where silence could never be mistaken for peace. Morning arrived with an almost theatrical precision. At 7 sharp, there was a knock at my door. A maid entered with a breakfast tray, fruit sliced neatly, eggs cooked to perfection, a small pot of tea steaming beside them. I was not used to being served. It felt like slipping into a costume that did not belong to me, but I ate anyway, knowing my energy would be needed. When I joined Arya in the sunlit kitchen, she was already dressed in her ballet leotard, her bag at her feet. She beamed when she saw me. "You are coming today, right? Papa said you will come." I nodded. "Yes, I will be with you." Damien entered a moment later, his presence filling the room like a shadow cast across the morning light. He wore a black suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. In one hand, he carried a sleek phone, his thumb moving across the screen with silent focus. He glanced up only briefly, his gaze landing on me before returning to his device. "Check her," he said simply. I pricked Arya's finger with practiced care, relieved to see the numbers in range. She wrinkled her nose but smiled bravely. "See, Papa? I am fine." "Because Claire is watching you," Damien replied, his tone unreadable. Then his eyes shifted to me. "Dr. Cole will meet you at the studio. Sophia will accompany you as well." Sophia. That was Natalia's second in command, though the girl herself called her a nurse. I knew better. The woman's eyes missed nothing. The ride to the ballet studio was quiet, the SUV gliding through city streets while Arya chattered beside me. Outside, the world went about its morning routine, commuters rushing, buses groaning, storefronts opening. Inside, the atmosphere remained taut, each man in the vehicle alert to movements most people would never notice. When we arrived, the studio was bright and full of little girls stretching at the bar. Arya ran to join them, her small body already poised with discipline. I took a seat at the back, Sophia beside me, her posture relaxed but her eyes constantly scanning the room. "You are not really a nurse, are you?" I asked softly. Sophia's lips curved faintly. "I have medical training, but my work is broader than that." "You are her bodyguard." "One of several," she admitted, "but I am the only female. That is why I am the closest." Her gaze shifted to me then, cool and assessing. "You must understand, Miss Morgan, Arya is not simply a child. She is a target. Anyone who wishes to harm her father would harm her first, which means anyone close to her becomes a target too." A chill settled over me, including me. Sophia's silence was answer enough. Dr. Cole arrived halfway through the class, greeting me with the same calm warmth as the day before. He sat with us, explaining more of Arya's needs, timing snacks around her activity, recognizing early warning signs. As Arya twirled across the studio, her face glowing with joy, I felt the weight of it all press heavier on my chest. She was just a little girl, and yet the air around her was thick with danger. After class, I tested her glucose again. It had dipped slightly, but still safe. She chose apple slices with peanut butter for her snack, eating happily as if nothing in the world could harm her. I wished I could believe that too. We returned to the house earlier than expected. As soon as the SUV passed through the gates, I sensed something had shifted. Guards moved with sharper urgency. More vehicles were parked in the circular drive. The air itself seemed charged. Damien was waiting at the entrance. Arya leapt into his arms, babbling about her arabesque, but his eyes never left mine. They were darker than I had ever seen them. "Go inside," he told Arya gently. "Wash up for lunch." She obeyed, guided by Sophia, though not without glancing back at me. When we were alone, Damien's tone hardened. "There was an incident last night. Someone attempted to use my movements against me. It has been corrected." But I will not take chances. That is why you returned here instead of the penthouse. The words chilled me. What kind of incident? His jaw tightened. The kind that does not concern you. What matters is this. You and Arya are safe only because I decide it. You will follow instructions, you will not question them. I bristled, though fear tugged at me. I deserve to know if her safety is at risk. And me ols. For a moment, silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, his gaze softened, not gentle, but thoughtful. You are right. You are part of this now. But understand knowledge can be as dangerous as ignorance. I tell you only what you need. He turned, striding toward his study. Come, there is something else. Inside, the fire crackled. On the desk lay a folder thick with documents. He slid it across the surface toward me. Your contract, salary, benefits, confidentiality clauses. Read it. I opened the folder. The numbers stunned me. 5 times what I could earn in a year at the diner, tuition covered, housing included. Health insurance, legal protections, everything spelled out in crisp language. It was more generous than I could have imagined, and yet as I turned each page, I felt as though I were binding myself with invisible chains. One thing is not here, I said quietly. You promised that if I ever felt unsafe, I could leave. Damien's expression darkened. If you feel unsafe, the threat will be eliminated, not you. The bluntness of his words sent a shiver down my spine. Still, my hand hovered over the signature line. The offer was impossible to refuse, the solution to every fear that had haunted me for years. But it was also a doorway into something I might never escape. As though sensing my hesitation, Damien leaned closer. Few things worth having come without complications, Claire. You are not signing away your freedom. You are signing into protection, into purpose, into my world. His eyes held mine, and I felt the pull again, that dangerous gravity I could not fight. My pen moved before I realized it, scrawling my name in ink that seemed heavier than blood. When it was done, Damien took the contract, slipping it into the drawer. He nodded once. Good. Then we begin. I sat back, my chest tight, realizing I had just crossed the point of no return. The ink on my signature was barely dry before I realized the shift. Something had changed between Damien and me the moment he slid the contract into his desk drawer. The unspoken had become binding. I was no longer a guest in this house, nor an outsider stumbling into it by accident. I had agreed to belong here, in whatever way belonging meant within the walls of the Moretti Empire. Damien's gaze lingered on me, sharp and unreadable. Your room is across the hall from Arya's. Natalia will show you the security systems tonight. Tomorrow, you begin in earnest. I expect diligence. She expects consistency. Do not fail her. It was not a threat, it was a decree. And yet, beneath the steel, I heard something else. A father's desperation buried under the armor of a man who could never afford to appear desperate. I returned to my room that evening with the contract echoing in my thoughts. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. I sat at the desk staring at the blank paper and unused pen that Natalia had left for me, as though daring me to write my fears down. But I did not. Some thoughts could not be trusted even to ink. A knock broke my reverie. The door opened and Arya peeked in, her hair tumbling loose from its braid. She padded across the carpet in her slippers and climbed onto my bed without hesitation. Papa says you are staying now, she said, hugging her knees. For real? Yes, I replied softly. For real? Her smile stretched wide. Good. I told him I needed you. She reached for my hand, her small fingers curling into mine. You are not afraid of him, are you? The question startled me. I hesitated before answering. Why would I be? Because everyone is. She shrugged as though it were the simplest truth. Even the men who work for him, even Natalia, they are afraid, but they pretend not to be. You did not pretend. You just looked at him. I had no answer. How could I tell her that fear was a constant thrum in my chest, but that something else, something dangerous and magnetic, pulled me toward him too? Arya yawned, her head dropping onto my shoulder. Within minutes she was asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I sat motionless, watching her chest rise and fall, struck by how fragile she looked, how oblivious to the storm swirling around her. Natalia appeared later to carry her back across the hall. She gave me a single approving nod, as if my ability to sit still beside the child was some test I had passed. Perhaps it was. The next morning began with a new rhythm. I checked Arya's glucose before breakfast, supervised her meal, and ensured she had her medical kit tucked neatly into her ballet bag. Damien was already gone, a note left in his place short, written in firm strokes of ink. Driver will bring you to the studio. Dr. Cole will meet you there. Follow his instructions. Also, in fax, there was no signature. He did not need one. At the studio, sunlight streamed through tall windows, painting the hardwood floor in gold. The room smelled faintly of resin and sweat. Young girls stretched at the bar, their chatter a soft hum. Arya joined them eagerly, her concentration absolute once class began. I watched from the back with Sophia beside me. Her expression was calm, but her eyes never stopped moving. I noticed the way she positioned herself back to the wall. Clear view of every entrance, hand always near the bag at her side. Does it ever stop? I asked quietly. The vigilance? She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see the faintest smile. Not in this world. If you are not vigilant, you are dead. Her words settled in my stomach like ice. Halfway through the class, Dr. Cole arrived. He greeted me with his usual calm professionalism, then leaned closer to speak in a low voice. You are adjusting well, I see. Arya looks brighter already. It seems she has found comfort in you. I glanced toward the child who was executing a careful pirouette, her face lit with pride. She has a way of making you want to stay, I admitted. Dr. Cole's smile was fleeting, tinged with something like sadness. That is what makes her vulnerable. Do not forget it. When the class ended, Arya rushed to me. Her face was flushed, her hair damp at the temples, but her eyes sparkled. I checked her levels, noting the slight dip. She accepted a granola bar from the cooler without complaint, munching happily as Sophia guided us back to the SUV. The return to the estate was quieter this time. The guards at the gates seemed even more alert, their hands twitching toward weapons I could not see but knew were there. Damien was waiting in the foyer when we arrived. He was on the phone, his voice low but sharp, words in Italian flowing like a blade. He ended the call the moment his eyes landed on us. Arya, he said softly, crouching to her level. How was class? Perfect, she beamed. Claire watched the whole time. His gaze flicked to me then, intense, assessing. For the briefest moment, something unspoken passed between us, recognition, perhaps, that I was now part of this delicate balance. He stood, straightened his cuffs, and his expression shuddered again into cool command. Come to my study after lunch, he told me. We will speak. The words were not a request. Later in the firelit study, he poured himself a drink and leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his eyes pinned me like a butterfly to a board. You signed the contract, he began. Do you regret it? I met his gaze, forcing my voice to stay steady. I do not know yet. And a flicker of something amusement maybe crossed his face. Honest. Good. Honesty is rare in my world. He set down the glass, his voice lowering. Understand this, Claire. I do not tolerate betrayal. Not from my men, not from my enemies, and not from those inside this house. If you remain fully. If you leave forever. My breath caught. And if I want to leave? His eyes darkened, a storm gathering in their depths. Do you? I hesitated. The truth tangled in my throat. Fear whispered yes, something else whispered no. He leaned closer, his presence suffocating and magnetic all at once. Remember what I told you. Once you enter my world, there is no way back. You can only go forward. The fire popped in the hearth, sending a cascade of sparks upward. For a long moment, the only sound was my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my ears. And I understood with terrifying clarity that my life had ceased to be entirely mine. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, though rhythm inside the Moretti estate was unlike any rhythm I had ever known. It was not the predictable exhaustion of double shifts at the diner, nor the monotonous lectures in cramped classrooms. Here, everything was measured, precise, guarded. Every routine had layers beneath it, every silence held weight, every glance carried meaning. Arya became the heart of my days. Her mornings began with a prick of a needle, her face scrunching in practiced bravery, followed by breakfast prepared with almost ceremonial care. Ballet, piano, tutoring, her schedule was as relentless as her father's, though hers was painted in softer colors. She chattered constantly, filling rooms with light that seemed to push against the shadows, always pressing in. I adapted quickly because I had no choice. I learned how to read the subtle signs in her skin and her mood, when her sugar dipped too low or rose too high. I memorized her favorite snacks, the ones that made compliance easier. I watched her sleep, counting breaths when anxiety clawed at me. In the quiet hours, I realized that my world had narrowed to a single point, keeping her steady, keeping her safe. But beyond that point, the house itself pulsed with something darker. Guards patrolled the grounds, their movements disciplined and silent. Natalia appeared at every turn, her presence both comforting and unnerving. Doors were locked, then unlocked without explanation. Damien moved through it all like a conductor, and the house bent itself to his will. Sometimes he was gone before dawn, returning long after night had swallowed the city. Other times he appeared unexpectedly at lunch, at dinner, leaning in a doorway as Arya performed a piano piece. Always his gaze found me, and always I felt it long after he had turned away. One evening I lingered in the music room while Arya practiced scales. Damien entered without sound, his steps almost predatory in their silence. He watched his daughter for a moment, his expression unreadable, before his eyes slid to me. "She plays better when you are here," he said. I startled slightly. "She plays well because she practices. She is disciplined." And when a faint curve touched his lips, though it was not quite a smile. "Discipline she gets from me. Joy she gets from you." Before I could respond, Natalia entered and murmured something in Italian. Damien nodded once, his jaw tightening, then turned to his daughter. 10 more minutes, Piccolamia. Then bed." Arya groaned, but obeyed, her fingers dancing dutifully over the keys. Damien left, and with him went the fragile sense of peace. Later that night, after Arya had fallen asleep, I found myself wandering. The corridors seemed endless, portraits of solemn ancestors staring down at me with judgment in their painted eyes. The estate at night was another creature entirely, alive with whispers and footsteps that vanished when I turned corners. I found myself outside the study. The door was cracked just enough for voices to seep through. I should have turned back, but something rooted me in place. "Romano is pressing harder," a man said, his voice deep and gravelly. "He can press until his hands break," Damien replied, calm and cutting. My answer does not change. Silence. Then the first man again. "And the girl? Bringing her here was that wise?" There was a pause so long I thought Damien might not answer. When he did, his words were like iron. "Arya trusts her. That is what matters." "She is an outsider," the other man pressed. "An outsider who knows too much." She is under my protection," Damien snapped, the words low but lethal, "and that makes her untouchable." My pulse thundered. I backed away before I could hear more, slipping into the shadows as footsteps approached the door. My hands shook all the way back to my room. Sleep did not come easily that night. I kept replaying the phrase "under my protection." What did it mean, really? A shield, yes, but also a chain, a mark that could never be erased. The following morning, I was woken not by a knock, but by the vibration of my new phone against the nightstand. The screen glowed with a single message. "Breakfast, my study afterward, D." The signature was unnecessary. His presence lived in every word. At the table, Arya greeted me with her usual smile, but my eyes kept drifting to Damien. He sat at the head, his suit immaculate, his attention split between his daughter and a series of documents spread beside his plate. Even while buttering toast for Arya, he read contracts worth more than I would ever see in my lifetime. He was a father and a sovereign in the same breath. After breakfast, I followed him to the study, my pulse unsteady. He closed the door behind us and poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one across the desk toward me. You overheard us last night. The words landed like a blow. My stomach dropped. There's no need to deny it. His gaze pinned me. I allow what I wish to be overheard. I swallowed hard. Why me? Why bring me here when you could hire a dozen trained professionals? He leaned forward, his hands steepled. Because Arya smiles for you in a way she never has for anyone else. Because you look at her and see a child, not leverage. And because when you look at me, you do not see a title. You see a man. That is dangerous, Claire, and it is valuable. What do you think? My chest tightened, fear and something far more treacherous twisting together. What happens now? His voice softened, though the steel beneath it remained. Now you learn what it means to live in my world, and you decide whether you can survive it. The study seemed smaller suddenly, the air thicker. His eyes held mine, dark and unyielding, until I had to look away. That night, as I checked Arya's levels and tucked her into bed, her small hand caught mine. Do not leave, Claire, promise. Is it cold out of you? I smoothed her hair back, whispering the only answer I could give. I promise. But inside, I wondered how long promises could hold in a world built on secrets and shadows. The following days blurred into a pattern of duty and unease. I woke each morning in a room too elegant to ever feel like mine, checked Arya's blood sugar before she even rubbed the sleep from her eyes, oversaw her meals, and shadowed her through lessons, practices, and play. Outwardly, everything was calm. The child thrived, her cheeks flushed with health, her laughter chasing shadows down gilded corridors. But beneath that fragile normalcy, something darker coiled. I felt it in the restless movements of the guards, in the way Natalia's hand hovered just a fraction too near the concealed weapon at her hip, and in Damien's eyes when he returned late at night, eyes shadowed by things he never said aloud. On the 5th morning since I had signed the contract, I woke to a storm outside. Rain lashed against the tall windows, the sky a smear of gray. The air inside felt heavy, the house hushed but alert. I had barely finished dressing when Natalia appeared at my door. Mr. Moretti wants to see you in the study, she said. Her voice carried no hint of emotion, but her posture was taut, precise. I followed her down the hall, my heart thudding. Damien was already waiting, standing near the fireplace, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, the scar on his jaw catching the light of the flames. He looked like a general preparing for battle. Sit, he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. I obeyed, folding my hands to keep them from shaking. There will be guests tonight, he said, his voice even but edged with steel. Associates, men who believe their traditions give them the right to dictate my choices. They will press me, they will test you, you will remain silent unless spoken to. You will stay near Arya at all times. The weight of his words sank into me. Why would they test me? His gaze was sharp, piercing, because they see everything. They will wonder why you are here. They will wonder what you are to me. They will look for weakness. Do not give them one. The implication left my skin cold. I was not simply a caretaker anymore. I was a piece on a board I could not see. That afternoon, the house transformed. Staff polished already immaculate surfaces. Guards doubled at every entrance, and Natalia oversaw preparations with unrelenting efficiency. Arya was dressed in a pale dress that made her look like porcelain. She twirled in front of me, oblivious to the tension humming through the walls. Do I look nice? She asked. You look beautiful, I said, forcing a smile. But remember, you must stay by my side tonight. She giggled. Papa already told me that 3 times. By dusk, the storm had passed, leaving the air damp and sharp. The first cars arrived just as the sun bled into the horizon. Dark vehicles glided through the gates, their headlights cutting through the wet night. Men stepped out in tailored suits, their expressions carved from stone. The foyer filled with low voices, firm handshakes, the faint scent of cigars. Damien moved among them like a king among dukes. He was calm, controlled, every gesture deliberate. Yet the way the others glanced at him, some with respect, some with resentment, spoke volumes about the delicate balance of power at play. I stayed near Arya, my hand wrapped firmly around hers. She was quieter than usual, her eyes darting nervously to faces she recognized. When one man leaned down, smiling too broadly as he pinched her cheek, she pressed closer to me. "Stay with me," I whispered, and she nodded. Dinner was served in the grand hall, a long table stretching beneath chandeliers that glowed like captured stars. I sat beside Arya, Damien at the head, his presence dominating the room. Conversation flowed in accented voices, English mingling with Italian. I understood little, but the tension was palpable. One man in particular drew my attention. He was older, his hair silver, his suit immaculate, his eyes sharp as blades. When he spoke, the others listened. I realized with a start that this must be Alessandro Romano, the man whose name I had overheard whispered through the walls. Romano's gaze slid toward me, lingering longer than it should have. "And this?" he asked in a tone both curious and dismissive. "Who is the girl?" The table quieted, my pulse hammered. Damien's voice was calm, but his jaw tightened. "She is Arya's guardian." Romano's smile was thin, predatory. "Guardian? Or something else?" A ripple of amusement passed through the men, sharp as broken glass. I felt Arya stiffen beside me. Damien's eyes turned to ice. "She is under my protection. That is all anyone needs to know." The finality in his tone silenced the table, though Romano's smile remained, curling with unspoken challenge. Dinner continued, but my appetite was gone. Every glance felt like a blade, every word like a test. I focused on Arya, making sure she ate, making sure she did not slip into the shadows of neglect in a room filled with men who saw her as nothing more than leverage. Afterward, as guests drifted toward the study for cigars and brandy, Damien caught my gaze. He inclined his head, a silent order. I followed him into a smaller room off the hall, Arya in tow. "You did well," he said once the door closed behind us. "You kept her steady." I exhaled shakily. They were watching me. "And Atheids! They will always watch you now." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Remember this, Claire. Protection is power, but it is also a target. By standing near me, you have both." His proximity stole my breath, the heat of the fire casting shadows across his face. I wanted to speak, to protest, to demand answers, but before I could, Arya tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide. "I do not like Uncle Romano," she whispered. "He looks at me funny." Damien's expression darkened, lethal. He crouched before her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Then you stay with Claire, always. Do you understand?" She nodded solemnly. Later, as the night stretched on and the guests finally departed, I stood at the window of my room, watching the taillights vanish into the darkness. My reflection in the glass looked pale, haunted, but beneath the fear was something else, a certainty that I was no longer invisible. Romano had seen me. The others had seen me. And whether I wanted it or not, I was now a piece of this dangerous game. And Damien Moretti had made it very clear. There was no stepping back. The night after Romano's visit lingered in my chest like smoke, refusing to clear. Sleep came in fractured pieces, broken by dreams, where chandeliers turned to nooses, and shadows crept closer no matter how quickly I ran. Each time I woke, I found myself listening not to silence, because silence did not exist in the Moretti house, but to the soft murmur of guards outside, to the distant creak of floorboards, to the breath of a mansion that never rested. By morning, my nerves were frayed. Still, I moved through the ritual, pricking Arya's finger, noting the numbers, offering praise for her bravery. She smiled at me sleepily, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Romano's presence had unsettled her more than she would admit. At breakfast, Damien was absent. Natalia informed me he had left before dawn for business. She said the word like a shield, deflecting questions before they could form. I ate little, my stomach tight, while Arya chattered about a science project she wanted to show me after her lessons. The day unfolded with a deceptive normalcy. Arya had piano, then math tutoring. I sat nearby, recording her glucose readings, encouraging her when she grew restless. She was brilliant, her young mind sharp and curious, but she was also 8 years old. Her father's world demanded discipline that sometimes pressed too hard against her small shoulders. That afternoon, a storm gathered outside. Dark clouds rolled over the lake, the wind howling against the windows. As the rain began, I took Arya to the sunroom. She curled beside me with a book while I checked her monitor again. Numbers steady. Relief softened the tension in my chest. Then, faint at first, came the sound of raised voices. Arya glanced up. "Papa is home?" But it was not Damien's voice. It was harsher, angrier. Natalia appeared almost instantly, her eyes sharp. "Stay here," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She slipped out, the door closing behind her. Arya frowned. "I do not like it when they fight. All love is answer." I stroked her hair, my heart pounding. The voices grew louder, spilling down the corridor. I could not make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Confrontation. Moments later, the door burst open. Damien entered, his suit damp from rain, his jaw clenched. Behind him, Marco, his head of security, followed, his face grim. Damien's eyes found Arya first, softening only slightly. Then they shifted to me. "Take her upstairs," he ordered. "What happened?" My voice trembled despite myself. "Do not ask," he snapped. Then, softer, "Just take her. Now." I obeyed, gathering Arya and leading her quickly through the hallways. Her small hand clung to mine, her steps hurried to keep up. I could feel her fear, even as she tried to hide it. In her room, I helped her change into pajamas and settle into bed, though it was hours before her usual bedtime. She curled beneath the covers, eyes wide. "Is Papa angry?" "No," I whispered, smoothing her hair. "Papa is protecting us." She nodded, but her grip on my hand did not loosen. Eventually, exhaustion won, and her breathing evened into sleep. When I finally returned to my own room, the house had gone unnervingly still. The storm raged outside, lightning casting fleeting shadows across the walls. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening, waiting. It was nearly midnight when a knock came. Damien entered without waiting for permission. His white shirt was stained near the cuff, not with rain, but with something darker. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. "You kept her safe," he said. My throat tightened. She was afraid. "She will always be afraid if she senses weakness." He moved closer, his presence filling the room. "You must never let her see you falter." I wanted to ask what had happened, what danger had breached the gates, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "And what about me? Do I not get to be afraid?" His gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment the steel cracked. "You are allowed fear, Claire, but you are not allowed to let it control you." Silence stretched. Outside, thunder rolled, shaking the glass. Damien's eyes softened fractionally. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, setting it on the desk. "These are numbers you may call if you ever feel unsafe. Natalia, Marco, myself. No one else. Do you understand?" I nodded, though my hands shook. He studied me a moment longer, then turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, his voice lower, almost reluctant. "Romano will not trouble you tonight, or again if he values his life. Sleep, Claire. Tomorrow will be different." The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with the storm and the echo of his words. I unfolded the paper. 3 numbers, written in strong, deliberate handwriting. Beneath them, a single phrase in Italian I did not understand. I traced the letters with my finger, the ink pressing into my skin like a brand. I realized then that this was not simply protection, it was possession. And though a part of me wanted to resist, another part, a part I was ashamed to acknowledge, felt safer in that possession than I ever had in freedom. I lay awake long into the night, the storm raging outside and the memory of Damien's dark eyes burning into me. When sleep finally came, it was not peaceful. It was heavy, dreamless, as though even my subconscious knew I had crossed too far to ever turn back. The morning after the storm, the world looked deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled across the gardens, the rain-washed air sharp and clean. From my window, I could see guards moving along the perimeter as if nothing had changed, as if the previous night's violence had been swallowed by the earth. But I knew better. The quiet was not peace. It was aftermath. At breakfast, Arya was unusually subdued. She picked at her toast, her eyes drifting constantly toward the door as though expecting her father to appear. But Damien did not join us. Instead, Natalia informed me he had business. That single word again, heavy with meaning it would never reveal. Arya's small fingers toyed with her spoon. Why does Papa always leave when bad things happen? I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. He leaves to make sure nothing bad happens again. She tilted her head, considering, then whispered, "He is not like other fathers." No, I thought. He was not. He was something else entirely. Something both terrifying and magnetic. A man who bent the world to his will and yet softened only for the child sitting before me. After breakfast, Natalia escorted us to the gardens. The sun warmed the wet stone paths, and Arya's mood brightened as she showed me the flowers that had survived the storm. She darted ahead, her laughter ringing like bells, and for a moment I could almost forget the weight pressing down on the house. Almost. By mid-afternoon, I was summoned to Damien's study. Natalia led me through the familiar halls, her steps precise, her silence absolute. She opened the heavy door and I stepped inside. Damien was seated behind his desk, sleeves rolled, papers spread before him. He looked up as I entered, his gaze sweeping over me in a way that made my pulse stumble. "Sit," he said. I obeyed, folding my hands in my lap. "You kept Arya steady last night." His voice was low, deliberate, even when you were afraid yourself. "I tried," I admitted. "She looks to me. I could not let her see. That is why she needs you." He leaned back, studying me with an intensity that stripped me bare. "She sees you as human. She sees me as unshakable. Between us, she finds balance." I swallowed hard, uncertain how to respond. He tapped the desk once, decisively. "Romano will press again. He sees weakness where there is none. But you must understand, if you remain here, you will be part of my defense. Not with weapons, with presence, with loyalty." My heart pounded. "You expect me to stand beside you in front of men like him?" "Yes," his answer was immediate. "They must see you. They must see that you are mine." The words jolted through me. "Yours?" "Under my protection," he clarified, though the glint in his eyes suggested more. "That is the only way you will survive this world. That is the only way Arya will." Silence filled the room, thick as smoke. The fire crackled, and I found myself staring into it, searching for an answer. But none came. That evening, Arya insisted on reading her favorite book aloud to both of us. We sat in the library, the three of us framed by shelves that smelled of leather and age. Arya perched on the couch between us, her small voice carrying the story, stumbling only when words grew too long. Damien listened with a patience I had not expected from him, nodding encouragement, his arm resting along the back of the couch. For a brief moment, the scene felt almost ordinary. A father, a daughter, a caretaker, a family. But when Arya fell asleep, her head resting on my shoulder, Damien rose and lifted her effortlessly into his arms. His expression softened as he carried her from the room. When he returned, the softness was gone, replaced by the mask I was beginning to recognize. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the firelight. You wonder why I brought you here, he said without looking at me. Why I did not choose someone more trained. I remained silent, waiting. Because you looked at my daughter and saw a child, he continued. Not an obligation, not leverage, just a little girl who needed help. That is rare in my world. That is why I will keep you. The finality in his voice made my breath catch. I should have protested, reminded him that I was not a possession. But the words stuck. A part of me, small, shameful, felt a dangerous comfort in the certainty of belonging to something larger than myself. He turned then, his eyes meeting mine across the firelit room. Sleep well, Claire. Tomorrow will not be so quiet. I left the study with my pulse racing, the echo of his words trailing me down the hall. That night, I dreamed of storms again, not of rain and thunder, but of a man whose shadow stretched across my life, pulling me deeper into a world where silence was never peace, and safety was just another form of captivity. When I woke, the paper with his numbers still lay on my nightstand, the ink a reminder that protection and possession had become one and the same. And as dawn broke, I knew I was no longer standing on the edge of his world. I was already inside it. By the next morning, the routine that had felt like a thin thread between two worlds now felt like a tether. My alarm rang at 6, but I had already been awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, watching the garden shift from shadow to gold. The Moretti estate looked serene in the dawn, but serenity here was never simple. It was the surface of a lake that hid deep currents. Arya was waiting for me in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess of braids undone. She smiled sleepily as I pricked her finger and read the numbers on the screen. Steady. A small victory. She took her breakfast without complaint, legs swinging beneath her chair. Papa left already, she said matter-of-factly, as though it were just weather. He said, we have lessons today. Lessons? I asked, pouring her orange juice. Not my lessons, your lessons, she grinned. Natalia said she would show you the house. Natalia appeared a moment later, dressed as always in her dark suit, her hair coiled tightly, her eyes as sharp as the polished marble floors. Mr. Moretti instructed me to familiarize you with the estate and its systems, she said. It is part of your role now. After Arya went off with her tutor, Natalia guided me down corridors I had not yet entered. She moved with the certainty of someone who knew every inch of the property. This house has 4 floors, she explained. 2 are public, 2 are private. You will rarely need the basements, but you should know the exits. In an emergency, you do not think. You follow the plan. We descended a narrow staircase to a lower corridor lined with steel doors. Behind one was a security room humming with monitors and quiet voices. Men in headsets tracked movements across the grounds, their screens showing camera feeds of every gate, hall, and garden path. This is how Mr. Moretti sees without being seen, Natalia said. If there is a breach, you will be guided from here. I stared at the wall of monitors, each one a slice of the estate's life. A gardener trimming hedges, 2 guards walking the perimeter, Arya at her desk upstairs. It felt invasive and comforting at the same time. Back upstairs, Natalia led me through a series of hidden doors concealed within paneled walls. One opened into a narrow passage running behind the main hall. Another led directly to the garage where black SUVs waited like sentinels. These are your routes, she said. If someone enters who should not, you do not confront them. You take Arya through one of these paths to the panic room. You will not freeze. You will move. Asmarkians. Her voice held no softness, but I could hear the weight behind it. She was not just instructing me, she was measuring me, deciding whether I could be trusted with the child she had sworn to protect. We ended the tour back in the foyer. Natalia stopped and faced me fully. You are not here because of your training, she said. You are here because the child responds to you. But that makes you a risk. People will notice, they will assume things, they will use you to reach her father. And in it, life, I swallowed hard. And if they try, you call, she said simply. And we end it. Her eyes held mine for a long moment, and then she was gone. disappearing into the silent machinery of the house. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I helped Arya with her insulin pump, guided her through a snack, watched her practice a ballet routine in the music room. She was radiant, a child in motion, but there was a shadow under her enthusiasm. A glance toward the door now and then, a slight flinch at footsteps in the hall. Romano's visit had left its mark. At lunch, she asked, "Will Papa be home tonight?" "I do not know," I admitted. "I wish he would stay more," she whispered. "He smiles different when you are here." The words unsettled me. Before I could respond, a guard appeared at the door and spoke quietly to Natalia. She crossed the room, leaned down, and murmured to me, "Mr. Moretti will return early. He asks that you meet him in the library at 3. When I entered the library that afternoon, Damien was already there, standing near the tall windows. Sunlight poured across the floor, turning his dark suit to muted charcoal. He was reading a document, but his eyes lifted the moment I stepped inside. "How was your morning?" he asked. I hesitated. Informative. "Good." He set the paper aside and gestured to a chair. "Sit." I did, my pulse unsteady. "You have been here long enough now to understand what it means to live under my roof," he said. "Protection has a cost. You know this." I nodded. "I am beginning to." "Romano will push harder," he continued. "He believes I can be cornered. He believes you are a weakness." My stomach tightened. "Am I?" His gaze darkened, but his voice remained calm. "No, but he will try to make you one. You must be careful. You must be steady. When you stand beside Arya, you are not just her caretaker. You are a message. You are untouchable, because I say you are." The words landed like a weight. I looked at him across the desk, at the scar on his jaw, at the eyes that saw too much. "And if I cannot handle it, you will," he said simply, "because you care for her, and because I will not let harm come to you." Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Damien's expression shifted, softening just enough to reveal the man beneath the mask. "She trusts you," he said quietly. "Do you trust me?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I did not know the answer. That evening, after dinner, Arya insisted on showing me the hidden passages Natalia had mentioned. We crept through narrow hallways behind paneled walls, our footsteps muffled. She giggled as she led me from one secret door to another, proud of knowing something few did. "This is where I go when Papa says hide," she whispered, crouching at the entrance to a small room lined with shelves of emergency supplies. The reality of her words hit me like a blow. An 8-year-old who had practiced escape routes, a panic room instead of a playroom. I knelt beside her. "You will not have to hide if I am here," I said, though I was not sure I believed it. She smiled up at me anyway. "You sound like Papa when you say that." One is Razit. When I finally returned to my room that night, exhaustion weighed on me, but sleep would not come. I stood at the window watching the guards pace the perimeter, their movements precise, their faces impassive. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and tried to remember what my life had been before that night on Westfield Avenue. The truth was, it was already fading. The diner, the cheap shoes, the cramped apartment with peeling paint, all of it felt like a story I had once heard about someone else. Now, there was only the child sleeping across the hall, the man whose shadow stretched over everything, and the house that watched me even as I watched it. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the gates, men like Romano waited, believing they could pry open cracks in the walls of this fortress. But as I finally crawled into bed, one thought held me steady. If they came, if they tried, I would not run. Not yet, not while Arya was still here. I closed my eyes, the hum of the house filling my ears, and let the truth settle over me like the heavy blankets. I was no longer just a guest. I was part of the Moretti family's defense, whether I had chosen it or not. And tomorrow, everything could change again. The next morning began with the sound of distant thunder rolling across the lake. From my window, the sky was a flat sheet of steel. Clouds gathered like an army above the city. Even inside the Moretti house, the air felt electric, charged with something I could not yet name. Arya was already awake when I entered her room. She sat cross-legged on her bed, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her hair still tangled from sleep. When I pricked her finger for the glucose check, she barely flinched. The numbers blinked steady on the screen, a small comfort amid the tension pressing in from outside. "Is Papa home?" she asked. "I think so," I said softly. "He is going to Italy soon." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes flickered with unease. The statement caught me off guard. "How do you know?" She shrugged. "He was talking to Natalia last night. He said Villa and Sicily." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Does that mean we are leaving?" I smoothed her hair back, my own heart stuttering. "I do not know yet." But when we came down to breakfast, Damien was there, sitting at the head of the table. He wore a dark suit without a tie, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing powerful forearms inked with the edge of a tattoo. His eyes were darker than usual, as if shadows had settled permanently within them. "Eat," he said, nodding toward Arya's plate. She obeyed without question. I took my seat opposite him, the weight of his presence making the room feel smaller. "Is it true?" I asked quietly. "You are taking her to Italy?" Damien's gaze cut to me, sharp as a blade. "Yes. And me?" "You will come." It was not a question, it was a command. Arya looked up, her eyes wide. "Really? Claire too?" "Yes," Damien said, his tone softening only for her. "Claire too." The rest of breakfast passed in tense silence. When Arya left for her tutoring session, Damien gestured for me to follow him into the study. The fire was unlit for once, leaving the room colder than usual. Damien stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the rain beginning to streak the glass. "The men who visited 2 nights ago," he began, his voice low, "represent the old ways. They believe I should tie my family to theirs through a marriage alliance. They believe tradition is stronger than choice. And you do not agree," I said carefully. "No." He turned to face me, his eyes hard. "I will not be owned, not by them, not by anyone." I hesitated. "Then why take me to Italy?" "Because appearances matter," he said simply. "If they see you with me, they will stop pressing. They will assume what I want them to assume." My stomach twisted. "You want me to pretend to be." "I want you to be exactly who you are," he interrupted. "An intelligent woman who cares for my daughter. The rest they will draw on their own." The implication hung heavy in the air. I stared at him, struggling to steady my voice. "You are using me as a shield." His jaw clenched. A flicker of something, anger, regret, crossing his face. "I am protecting my daughter. And you." I took a step back, needing distance from his intensity. "I did not sign up for this." "No," he said softly, "but you walked into it the moment you picked her up from that sidewalk." As in might, silence stretched between us, the rain tapping harder against the glass. His eyes found mine, dark and unreadable. "You can refuse," he said at last. "I will not force you, but if you refuse, you leave, immediately, and you do not come back." The finality in his tone stole my breath. "I need time to think," I whispered. "You have until tonight." He turned back to the window, dismissing me without another word. I left the study shaken, my heart hammering. In the hallway, Natalia was waiting. She gave me a look that was almost sympathetic. "He does not give that kind of choice lightly," she murmured. I went to Arya's room and found her sitting at her desk, drawing a picture of the 3 of us, a crude sketch of a man, a woman, and a child holding hands. My throat tightened. "Are we going to Italy?" she asked again. I crouched beside her. "Maybe." "Good," she said, coloring in the sky with a bright blue crayon. "Then you can see where Papa grew up. He says it is very beautiful. He says it is ours. Ours." The word hit me like a stone dropped into deep water. That evening, after Arya was asleep, I walked the garden paths alone. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick beneath my shoes. Guards moved in the distance like dark sentinels. Overhead, the sky had cleared to a hard, cold blue, scattered with stars. I thought of my life before Westfield Avenue, the diner, the cramped apartment, the endless grind. I had wanted a way out. Now I had one. But it came wrapped in shadows and guns and a man whose gravity I could not escape. Back in my room, I stared at the paper with the 3 numbers Damien had given me. Protection, possession, choice. Each word felt interchangeable. When the knock came at my door just before midnight, I knew it would be him. Damien stepped inside without waiting, closing the door softly behind him. He looked different without his jacket, the lines of his shirt stretched across his chest, the scar on his jaw stark against his skin. "You have decided?" he asked. I met his gaze, my pulse loud in my ears. "If I go with you, what am I walking into?" His expression softened slightly. "Not a game, not a trap. A life. My life. And hers." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The house seemed to hold its breath. Then I whispered, "Yes." Something flickered in his eyes, relief, triumph, something else entirely. He stepped closer, his voice a low promise. "Then we leave tomorrow." He left without another word, and I stood alone in my room, the echo of his presence lingering like the scent of sandalwood and rain. I lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, knowing that when morning came, I would be on a plane to Italy with the most dangerous man I had ever met and the little girl who had changed everything. And whatever awaited us there would be no turning back. Dawn came pale and cold, a thin veil of light breaking across the lake as the Moretti estate stirred to life. The air outside my window carried a restless energy, as though even the sky knew that today was a day of departure. The decision I had whispered the night before weighed heavy yet irreversible. By agreeing to go with Damien and Arya, I had bound myself tighter to their world than ever before. The house hummed with quiet preparation. Staff moved through the halls with deliberate speed, suitcases discreetly carried, phones pressed to ears. The black SUVs waited in the circular drive, gleaming beneath the morning light like armored beasts ready to escort us into whatever awaited. Arya bounded into the kitchen with an excitement only a child could muster. She wore a pale blue dress and carried her rabbit tucked under her arm, her eyes bright. "Claire, we are going on an adventure," she announced proudly. "Papa says Italy is where the sun feels different." I forced a smile. "Are you ready?" "Yes," she said, swinging her legs beneath her chair as I checked her glucose levels. The numbers were steady, though my hands shook slightly as I entered them into her log. Damien appeared a few minutes later. He wore a charcoal suit, his overcoat draped over one arm, his expression impenetrable. Yet when Arya ran to him, his hand instinctively settled on her shoulder, steady and protective. "Eat," he instructed her gently, and she obeyed without protest. His gaze flicked to me then, sharp but unreadable. "We leave in 20 minutes. I nodded, my throat dry. The journey began with silence. Natalia joined us in the SUV, her eyes constantly scanning the roads. Enzo drove, his massive frame rigid with focus, while Luca followed in the second vehicle. The city blurred past, familiar streets fading into the anonymity of highways, then the stark expanse of the airport's private terminal. Inside, everything was orchestrated with seamless precision. Security was tight but discreet, the Moretti name carrying invisible weight that opened doors without questions. A sleek jet waited on the tarmac, its silver body gleaming in the weak sunlight. Arya pressed her face to the window as we boarded, her excitement bubbling over. "Papa, can I sit by the window?" "Of course," Damien said, lifting her into a seat near the front. I slid into the seat beside her, while Damien took the one across the aisle. Natalia remained further back, already speaking in low tones to one of the attendants. Every detail was managed, every movement deliberate. The engines roared to life, and soon the ground fell away beneath us. Arya clapped her hands, thrilled by the sensation, then curled into her seat with her rabbit, drifting into sleep as the plane leveled. I stared out the window at the blanket of clouds, my thoughts racing. The reality of what I had agreed to settled heavy in my chest. I was leaving behind the diner, the apartment, the scraps of freedom I had once clung to. Ahead lay a country I had never seen, bound to people who were not truly mine, yet had already become the center of my existence. Damien broke the silence. You have never been to Italy, have you? I shook my head. You will see the villa. It has stood for centuries. My family built it with blood and stone. It is not just a home. It is a statement. Of what? I asked quietly. Of survival, he said simply. For a while, neither of us spoke. The drone of the engines filled the cabin, steady and relentless. I risked a glance at him, catching the profile of a man both impossibly strong and impossibly weary. He carried power like armor, but beneath it, I glimpsed the toll it took. Hours later, the plane descended into golden light. Through the window, I saw rolling hills, cypress trees, and the glittering edge of the sea. It was breathtaking, a landscape that seemed untouched by time. The villa was exactly as Damien had promised. It stood atop a hill overlooking the coast, its stone walls weathered but proud, its gardens sprawling like something from a dream. Arya squealed with delight as we drove up the winding road, her small hands pressed to the glass. "Papa, it is so big," she exclaimed. Damien's expression softened. "It was mine when I was your age, now it is yours. I bay." Inside, the villa was both beautiful and forbidding. Frescoes adorned the high ceilings, tapestries lined the walls, and marble floors echoed with every step. Yet despite the grandeur, there was a weight in the air, as though the stones themselves remembered centuries of secrets. Natalia guided us to our rooms. Mine overlooked the sea, the waves crashing against the cliffs far below. The view was stunning, but I could not shake the feeling of being watched, even here. That evening, Damien hosted a small dinner in one of the villa's many dining rooms. Only a handful of his closest men attended, their conversations hushed, their eyes always alert. Arya sat beside me, nibbling on bread and cheese, her fatigue finally catching up with her. When she excused herself, guided upstairs by Sophia, Damien leaned back in his chair, his gaze locking on mine. "You see now why I brought you," he said. "This place is old, powerful, but even here eyes will be watching. You must play your part." I bristled. "And what exactly is my part?" His lips curved, though not in amusement. "To protect her, to keep her steady, and to remind me that there are still things worth fighting for." The intensity of his words left me breathless. I stared at him, trying to decipher whether he saw me as a shield, a necessity, or something more dangerous. When the dinner ended, I walked alone through the villa's echoing halls. My footsteps sounded too loud. My reflection caught in ancient mirrors staring back at me with haunted eyes. Outside, the waves pounded the cliffs, relentless and eternal. I stood at the balcony, the sea wind tugging at my hair, and whispered to the darkness, "What have I done?" But the only answer was the sound of the waves crashing far below, carrying my words away into the endless night. The villa at night was another world. Its corridors stretched endlessly, lit by sconces that cast pools of amber light across frescoed ceilings and stone walls. Shadows crept between arches, whispering of centuries of secrets embedded in the very mortar. Every step echoed, reminding me that I was an intruder in a place built long before my name ever mattered. I could not sleep. After Arya had been tucked into her bed upstairs, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, I had retreated to my own room overlooking the sea. But the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs refused to lull me. Instead, they roared like a warning. Finally, I left my room and wandered through the halls, drawn by the restless energy that seemed to hum in the villa itself. Somewhere down the corridor, voices drifted, low and urgent. I followed the sound until I reached a half-open door. Inside, Damien stood with two of his men, Enzo and Luca, their expressions grim. Papers were spread across the table, maps and photographs scattered like pieces of a puzzle I was not meant to see. "Romano will not stop," Damien was saying, his voice low but edged with steel. "He thinks crossing the ocean gives him reach. He is wrong." Enzo nodded. "We have word he has men in Palermo, watching." Damien's hand clenched on the edge of the table. "Let them watch. We will remind them what it means to stare too long into my house." A shiver crawled down my spine. I should have left. Should have turned back before they noticed me. But the floor betrayed me, a creak beneath my weight. 3 pairs of eyes snapped to the doorway. Damien's gaze locked on mine, sharp and unreadable. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he dismissed his men with a flick of his hand. They left without protest, closing the door behind them. "Eavesdropping, Claire?" he asked, his tone unreadable. Heat flooded my face. I heard voices. "I did not mean to—" "You did," he interrupted, crossing the room in 2 strides. He stopped close enough that the scent of sandalwood and storm air wrapped around me. "You keep putting yourself where you should not be." "I did not ask to be here at all," I shot back, though my voice trembled. His eyes narrowed, but not in anger, more in something like amusement. "And yet here you are." Silence stretched. My pulse thundered in my ears. Finally, he turned away, pouring amber liquid into a glass. "Romano thinks he can frighten me with tradition, with whispers. He forgets who I am." I gathered my courage. "He frightens Arya. That should matter more than pride." Damien's jaw tightened. "Everything I do is for her. Everything. Do not mistake resolve for arrogance." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to see only the father who carried his daughter with tenderness. But standing in that ancient room, surrounded by shadows of his empire, I was reminded again of the man whose name made others tremble. He handed me the glass, though I had not asked for it. "Drink. You look like you need it." I hesitated, then took a sip. The burn of whiskey slid down my throat, sharp and unfamiliar. Damien watched me, his eyes dark and steady. "You think you are different," he said quietly. "You think you are untouched by this world because you came from outside it. But you are already in it. The moment you picked up Arya on that street, you were mine, whether you admit it or not." The word "mine" echoed in the air between us. I wanted to protest, to deny it, but the truth lodged in my chest like a stone. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the crash of waves beyond the windows. Damien stepped closer, his gaze searching mine, as though looking for something he had not yet found. My breath caught, my heart racing, until a knock at the door shattered the moment. Natalia entered, her expression controlled but her eyes sharp. "It is time," she said simply. Damien nodded, his mask sliding back into place. He set his glass down and moved past me, his shoulder brushing mine, leaving a trail of heat in its wake. I turned to Natalia. "Time for what?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "For business. Stay with Arya. Do not let her out of your sight." I ran. The warning in her tone chilled me. The rest of the night passed slowly. I stayed in Arya's room, sitting in a chair near her bed while she slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering outside her world. I listened to the faint hum of voices below, the sound of footsteps echoing through stone corridors, the distant growl of engines starting in the courtyard. When Damien finally returned, it was nearly dawn. I woke to the sound of his footsteps in the hall, heavy and deliberate. He paused at Arya's door, opening it just enough to look inside. His eyes softened as they fell on his daughter's sleeping form. Then they lifted to me. Our gazes locked across the dim light. For an instant I saw not the Mafia lord, not the man of shadows, but someone else, a man carrying burdens too heavy for one lifetime. He said nothing, but the silence between us was louder than any words. He closed the door gently, and his footsteps faded down the hall. I sat there until the first rays of morning spilled through the curtains, knowing with bone-deep certainty that Italy was not sanctuary. It was another battlefield, and I had stepped directly into its heart. The sun rose over the villa in a blaze of gold, painting the sea below in streaks of fire. From my balcony, I could see the restless waves colliding with the cliffs, their rhythm steady and merciless. The night before still clung to me the sound of footsteps, the voices of men meeting in secret, the look Damien had given me before disappearing into the depths of his empire. Arya greeted the morning with her usual cheer, bounding into the kitchen, still hugging her stuffed rabbit. She spoke of wanting to explore the gardens, of seeing the olive groves she had only heard her father describe. Her smile was so bright that for a moment I could almost forget the weight pressing on this house. Damien did not join us for breakfast. Natalia explained he had been up since before dawn, handling business. That single word had become a shield, hiding truths I was not yet ready to face. After breakfast, Arya insisted we walk the gardens. The air smelled of rosemary and damp earth, the storm of days past having left the ground fresh. She skipped along the stone path, pointing out statues, fountains, and flowers, her laughter carrying across the courtyard. For a while, it felt like any ordinary day in any ordinary life. But nothing about this life was ordinary. Halfway through our walk, Natalia appeared, her pace brisk. "Claire," she said, her voice clipped. "Mr. Moretti requests you in the study." Now, I glanced at Arya, hesitant to leave her. Natalia's eyes softened just slightly. "Sophia will stay with her. Go." I followed Natalia inside, the cool air of the villa swallowing me whole. The study doors loomed, heavy and foreboding. She pushed them open, and there was Damien, standing behind his desk, a map of Sicily spread before him. Enzo and Luca flanked him, their expressions grim. His eyes flicked to me as I entered. "Sit." I obeyed, my pulse racing. "There is trouble brewing," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Romano has been moving pieces. He thinks distance will protect him. He is wrong." He gestured to the map, his finger pressing down on a marked port city. "This is where he has begun operations. He wants to use the sea. He wants to cut into my routes." I swallowed hard, uncertain why I was here for this conversation. "What does this mean for Arya?" Damien's gaze snapped to mine, sharp and unyielding. "It means you do not let her out of your sight. It means you do not falter." His words carried more than instruction. They carried the weight of responsibility I had not asked for, but could no longer deny. Enzo spoke, his voice low. "We should move the girl, keep her further inland." Damien shook his head. "No, she stays here. They will expect me to hide her. I will not give them the satisfaction." I felt the chill of those words sink into my bones. Arya's safety was not just about protection, it was about strategy, power, defiance. After the meeting, I returned to Arya, who was in the music room practicing piano. Her small hands danced clumsily over the keys, her tongue sticking out in concentration. She looked up when she saw me, her face lighting with relief. "Where did you go?" she asked. "To speak with your father," I answered carefully. "Was he angry?" "No. Just serious." She nodded as though she understood more than a child should. "He is always serious, but he smiles more when you are here." Her words pierced me deeper than I wanted to admit. That evening, Damien joined us for dinner. Arya chattered happily about the gardens, the piano, her plans to draw a map of the villa. Damien listened, his expression softening with every word she spoke, but his eyes flicked to me often, holding me in their grip, as though reminding me of the unspoken bond we now shared. After Arya was in bed, I lingered in the hall outside her room. The villa was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of burning wood from the fireplaces. When I finally turned toward my own room, I found Damien waiting. "You are afraid," he said, not as a question, but a statement. Yes, I admitted, I would be a fool not to be. He stepped closer, his presence enveloping me, the scar on his jaw catching the dim light. "Fear keeps you sharp, but do not let it control you. You are stronger than you think." His hand brushed mine, barely a touch, yet enough to send heat rushing through me. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between us, to the unspoken tension that had grown since the night I first called his number. Then he pulled back, his eyes hardening again. Rest. Tomorrow, things move forward. I watched him walk away, his silhouette disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. That night, I lay awake listening to the waves crash below the cliffs, my thoughts a storm of their own. I had chosen to step into this world, but choice felt like a fragile illusion. Romano was out there circling like a predator. Damien was beside me, both protector and captor, and in the center of it all was a child who trusted me more than anyone else. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, one truth clung to me like the salt air seeping through the windows. The real battles had not yet begun. And when they did, none of us would leave unchanged. The next day dawned with skies so clear they seemed almost false. The sea glittering like glass beneath the morning sunday. The villa stood proud against the cliffs, its ancient stones catching the light. Yet despite the beauty, unease coiled in my chest. The calm felt deceptive, the kind of stillness that came before something shattered. Arya was restless that morning. She rushed through her glucose check, impatiently tapping her foot as I recorded the numbers. "Can we go to the village today?" she asked suddenly. "I want to see where Papa grew up. He promised me." I smiled faintly. "We will ask him." But Damien was already gone, Natalia informed me. Business in Palermo, always business. Always spoken with the kind of tone that closed doors and silenced questions. Arya's disappointment was clear, but she hid it quickly, practicing her ballet stretches in the sunroom while I sat nearby. She was so small, so determined, her brow furrowed in concentration. Every time I looked at her, the truth pressed harder. This child was both the center of Damien's empire and its greatest vulnerability. By midday, the villa grew tense. Guards shifted more frequently, their radios murmuring in clipped Italian. Natalia moved through the halls like a blade, efficient and unyielding. I sensed something was coming, though no one said it aloud. It was late afternoon when Damien returned. I was in the library with Arya, helping her read through a book far too advanced for her age, when the heavy doors opened. He entered with a storm at his back, his coat still damp, his eyes darker than the sea at night. Arya jumped up. "Papa!" He caught her in his arms, holding her tight for a long moment before setting her down. His gaze then shifted to me, and I felt the weight of it in my bones. "Claire," he said, his voice low. "Come." I followed him to the study. The fire burned low, casting shadows across the room. Enzo and Luca stood by the windows, their faces grim. On the desk lay a folder thick with photographs and reports. Damien poured himself a drink but did not touch it. "Romano has moved closer. He has people here, in Sicily, watching, waiting." A chill ran through me. What does that mean for us? "It means they will try to test me," he said flatly. "And they will fail." He looked at me then, his eyes hard but not unkind. "You need to understand something, Claire. In this world, safety is never a guarantee. Protection is not a wall. It is a war we fight every day." I swallowed hard. "And Arya?" "She is the reason I fight," he said simply. The words struck me, both terrifying and strangely grounding. That night, dinner was quiet. Arya spoke little, sensing the tension that thickened the air. Afterward, Damien excused himself, and I stayed with Arya until she fell asleep, her hand clutching mine even in dreams. When I finally left her room, the villa was hushed but not peaceful. Guards moved like shadows through the corridors. The air smelled faintly of rain and smoke, though the fires had long burned out. I wandered toward the balcony, seeking fresh air, but stopped short when I saw Damien standing there already, his silhouette framed against the sea. The moonlight silvered his features, the scar along his jaw stark in the pale glow. He did not turn when he spoke. "Do you regret it?" "Signing the contract. Coming here." I stepped closer, my heartbeat quickening. "Sometimes," I admitted. "And sometimes I feel like I was always meant to." "Ali." At that he turned, his eyes searching mine with unsettling intensity. "You are not like them," he said quietly. "You do not bow, you do not cower, you stand." "I am afraid all the time," I whispered. "Fear is not weakness," he replied. "It is honesty. The weak are the ones who lie about it." For a long moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of the waves. He stepped closer, so near I could feel the heat of him, the weight of his presence pulling me in. His gaze dropped briefly to my lips before lifting back to my eyes, his restraint palpable. "Claire," he said softly, almost reluctantly, "you are under my protection. But that means you are also under my claim. Do you understand?" My breath caught. "And if I do not want to belong to anyone?" A faint smile touched his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. "Then you should not have stepped into my world." "But you did." and now there is no going back. And his words were both a warning and a promise, and I could not decide which frightened me more. Before either of us could speak again, Natalia appeared at the balcony door. Her expression was tight. "It is time." Damien's jaw clenched. He turned to me, his voice low. "Stay with Arya, no matter what happens tonight." And with that he was gone, disappearing into the depths of the villa with his men. I stood frozen, the sea roaring below, my heart hammering. Whatever storm was coming, I knew it was only the beginning. I returned to Arya's room and sat beside her bed, listening to the faint hum of voices below, the shuffle of movement through the halls, the distant growl of engines starting in the courtyard. The villa was a fortress, but even fortresses could fall, and I realized with chilling clarity that the true test had not yet begun. The villa did not sleep that night. From Arya's room, I could hear the movements, boots against stone, doors opening and closing in quick succession, the murmur of men's voices deep in conversation. The air was thick with anticipation, charged with the promise of something dangerous. Arya stirred in her sleep, her small hand clutching my wrist as though she sensed the storm outside her dreams. I smoothed her hair back and whispered words of comfort, though my own heart thudded with unease. Damien's words echoed in my mind. "Stay with her, no matter what happens tonight." Hours passed before the house grew quieter, the activity shifting outward, into the gardens and beyond the gates. When I finally drifted into sleep in the chair beside Arya's bed, it was restless and shallow. By morning, the villa felt strangely hollow. Damien had not returned. Arya woke with a frown, her eyes immediately searching the room. "Papa?" she asked. "He is working," I said softly. "He will be back soon." It was the truth, and yet not enough. She nodded but did not smile. Breakfast was subdued. Even Natalia's presence was sharper than usual, her watchful eyes scanning every corner. Enzo and Luca spoke in hushed tones near the doorway, their faces grim. Something had shifted in the night, though no one said it aloud. By mid-morning, Damien returned. The moment he stepped into the villa, the energy of the house changed. Guards straightened, servants stilled, and the tension in the air deepened. He wore the same suit from the night before, creased now, his shirt collar open, his jaw shadowed with stubble. His expression was unreadable, his movements taut with controlled force. Arya ran to him, relief shining in her eyes. He lifted her easily, holding her tight for a moment before setting her back down. "Go with Claire," he murmured, his voice softer than I had expected. "I will join you later." If, she obeyed, though she glanced back at him repeatedly, unwilling to let him out of her sight. When we were alone, Damien motioned for me to follow him into the study. The heavy doors shut behind us with a thud. The smell of smoke clung faintly to his clothes, and his eyes looked darker than ever. "What happened?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. He poured himself a glass of water, not whiskey, and drank deeply before answering. A message was delivered. "Romano believes he can test me here, in my own country. He was wrong." His voice was flat, but his hands were clenched against the desk. I hesitated. "A message? What kind of message?" His gaze flicked to mine, sharp as a blade. "The kind you do not need to know." I wanted to push, to demand clarity, but his tone warned me against it. Still, silence left me restless. "Arya asked for you this morning. She misses you." Something softened in his expression, though only slightly. "I know, and that is why she must never see weakness in me. Not now." "Children are not blind," I said quietly. "She sees more than you think." He studied me for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "Perhaps that is why she has you, to see what I cannot show." The admission startled me. It was not often that Damien revealed vulnerability even in words cloaked in steel. The rest of the day unfolded under an uneasy calm. Arya and I walked the villa's gardens, where olive trees twisted their branches toward the sky, their roots deep in ancient soil. She collected fallen leaves, pretending they were treasures, while guards lingered at a distance, never out of sight. At one point, she looked up at me and asked, "Do you think Papa is lonely?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you think that?" Because sometimes even when he smiles, his eyes do not. I had no answer. I could only hold her hand tighter. That evening, Damien joined us for dinner. His presence was quieter than usual, though no less commanding. Arya chattered about the olive groves, showing him the leaves she had gathered, and he listened with surprising patience. His eyes, however, flicked to me often, lingering in ways that unsettled me more than silence. After dinner, when Arya had gone upstairs, Damien asked me to stay. We sat in the library, the fire casting long shadows across the bookshelves. "You are adjusting," he said. I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Is that what this is? Adjustment? It feels more like survival." "Survival is adjustment," he replied, "and you are surviving well." I stared into the flames, the heat licking at my skin. "I do not know if I can survive everything. I am not like you." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You are stronger than you believe. You would not be here if you were not." The intensity in his eyes stole my breath. He reached out then, his fingers brushing mine where they rested on the arm of the chair. It was the barest touch, but it burned through me like fire. "Damien," I whispered, though I did not know if it was protest or plea. He pulled back suddenly, his jaw tightening. "It is late. You should rest." The dismissal was abrupt, but the air between us crackled with what had almost happened. I rose, my knees unsteady, and left the library without another word. In my room, I pressed my back to the door, my heart pounding. The villa was a fortress, but the real battle was inside me, between fear and desire, between freedom and the strange safety of belonging to him. When I finally lay down, sleep came in fragments, haunted by shadows that wore Damien's face, by waves that rose higher and higher until they swallowed me whole. And when I woke, I knew the storm was far from over. It was only gathering strength. The days after Damien's late-night return passed in a haze of quiet tension. The villa looked the same on the surface, its marble floors gleaming, its gardens alive with the sound of birds. But beneath that calm, I could feel the strain tightening like a bowstring. Guards rotated more often, their presence less discreet than before. Natalia moved with sharper precision, speaking less, watching more. Even Enzo and Luca seemed heavier with unspoken knowledge, their gazes constantly tracking the horizon. And Damien, he was a storm contained in a man's body. He moved through the halls with the weight of authority, but his shoulders bore the shadows of sleepless nights. Each time I saw him, there was something in his eyes, dark, smoldering, that spoke of battles fought in silence, of decisions that carved deeper scars into his soul. For Arya, life continued with a fragile semblance of normalcy. She practiced piano, recited her lessons, wandered the gardens with me at her side. But even she sensed the shift. She clung to me more, her questions sharper, her glances toward her father more searching. One afternoon, while we sat in the courtyard painting with watercolors, she asked, "Claire, will Papa ever stop fighting?" The question stilled me. "What do you mean?" "He is always fighting," she said simply. "Even when he is not angry. Even when he smiles. It is like there is a fight inside him that never ends." I had no answer. I only pulled her close and kissed the top of her head, praying silently that she would never understand too much of the world she had been born into. That night, Damien summoned me to the study again. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room. Papers littered the desk, maps and photographs marked with red circles and lines. "You have seen Romano," he said without preamble. "You know what he wants." I think, "Yes," I said cautiously. "He will not stop until he believes he has won." That is who he is. He cloaks his greed in tradition, in the old ways, but it is nothing more than hunger for power. His eyes met mine, sharp and unyielding. "If you are to remain here, if you are to stay with Arya, you must understand the danger fully. You cannot flinch when shadows grow close." I swallowed hard. "And if I cannot, then you should leave now," he said. His voice was calm, but it cut through me like a blade. Because once Romano moves against me here, there will be no safe place. Not for me, Not for you. Not even for her. His words chilled me. Why tell me this? Because you chose to stay, because she trusts you. His jaw tightened, and because I cannot protect her if you do not stand firm beside her. For a long moment, we simply looked at one another, the fire crackling between us. Then he leaned back, his voice softening just slightly. You are stronger than you think, Claire. Do not forget that. The following day brought confirmation of his warning. We were in the gardens when Natalia received a call on her earpiece. Her face went still and she immediately moved to our side. Inside, now. Her tone left no room for argument. She ushered us through the corridors, her hand pressed to her concealed weapon, her eyes scanning every corner. What is happening? I asked, my voice tight. Uninvited visitors, she said. Nothing more than eyes where they should not be. But her pace, her posture betrayed that it was more. Once Arya was safe in her room, Natalia turned to me. You cannot show fear in front of her. Do you understand? If she sees you afraid, she will be afraid too. And fear makes children vulnerable. I nodded, though my knees felt weak. That night, I heard the growl of engines outside the villa, the muffled shouts of men, the metallic click of weapons. I sat in the chair beside Arya's bed, my heart pounding as the sounds of confrontation bled faintly through the walls. Then silence, heavy, suffocating silence. When the door finally opened, Damien stood there. His shirt was darkened with sweat, his jaw tense, but his eyes went immediately to his daughter. He crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her bed, brushing her hair back with a hand that trembled only slightly. She stirred but did not wake. His gaze lifted to me then, and something passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we had weathered, and of the storms still to come. Later, after he left, I sat staring out at the sea, the waves crashing endlessly against the cliffs. I realized then that there was no longer a line between his world and mine. I had crossed it, and each day drew me deeper. Romano was circling closer, waiting for his moment. Damien was bracing for war, and I was caught in the middle, bound by a promise to protect a child and tethered by feelings I could no longer deny. Sleep came late, restless and shallow, filled with dreams of shadows and fire. And when I woke, the sea was still roaring, as if it knew what I did. The real battle had not yet begun. The villa felt different the morning after the confrontation at the gates. Though the halls were polished and quiet, though Arya laughed as she ate her breakfast, though the sun poured golden light across the terraces, I could feel the fracture beneath the surface. Guards moved in tighter patterns, their radios alive with static. Natalia's eyes were sharper than ever, scanning each face and corner as if danger might step out of the shadows at any moment. Damien was present at the table, but his silence was heavier than usual. He ate little, his gaze fixed on a document in his hand while Arya chattered beside him. He responded only in short murmurs, but each time she smiled up at him, the hard line of his jaw softened. After breakfast, he rose without warning. Claire, walk with me. The command was quiet but absolute. I followed him through the halls, my pulse quickening. He led me to the balcony overlooking the sea. The waves crashed below, endless and merciless, their rhythm echoing the tension between us. Romano is escalating, he said without preamble. Last night was only a test. He is probing for weakness. And what did he find? I asked softly. Damien turned to me, his eyes dark. None, because I do not allow it. I studied his face, the scar along his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes. But he will keep coming, will he not? Yes, Damien admitted. He will not stop until he is crushed, or until I am. The bluntness of his words stole my breath. I wanted to protest, to remind him of Arya, of what she needed, but the truth was already in his eyes. He would not yield. Then what about us? I whispered. Me, Arya. Where do we fit in this war? He stepped closer, his presence suffocating and magnetic all at once. You are my reason. She is my blood. You are both what I protect, what I fight for. His voice dropped lower, almost fierce. Do you understand? Without you, Without her, there is nothing worth this. The intensity in his words shook me more than the stormy sea below. I looked away, my chest tight. That evening, the villa hosted a gathering. Not allies this time, but men who owed loyalty to Damien, soldiers and lieutenants summoned from across Sicily. They filled the great hall with dark suits and hushed voices, their eyes hard, their hands never far from hidden weapons. Damien stood at the head of the room, commanding without effort. He spoke in Italian, his words low but cutting, every sentence laced with authority. Though I understood little, I could feel the weight of his speech. The men listened, their nods sharp, their resolve hardening with each word. I stood at the edge of the hall with Arya, who clung to my hand. She was quieter than usual, her eyes wide as she watched her father transform into something larger than a man, into a leader, a force, a storm. When the meeting ended, the men dispersed quickly, their faces grim but resolute. Damien approached us, his expression unreadable. He brushed a hand over Arya's hair, then looked at me. Stay close to her. The days ahead will not be easy. That night I could not sleep. I sat at my window, staring at the sea, my thoughts racing. The waves pounded the cliffs, relentless, eternal. I thought of Romano, of his men circling closer, of the danger tightening around us like a noose. And I thought of Damien, of the weight he carried, of the fire in his eyes when he spoke of protection and possession. Near midnight, the silence of the villa shattered. Shouts echoed through the halls, sharp and urgent. The sound of boots thundered against stone, radios crackling with commands. I leapt from my bed and ran into the corridor just as Natalia appeared, her weapon drawn, her expression fierce. Back to Arya's room, she ordered. What is happening? An attempt, she snapped. Do not argue, go. Fear clawed at my chest, but I obeyed. I raced down the hall, my bare feet slapping against the cold marble. I burst into Arya's room and found her sitting up in bed, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide with terror. Claire, she whispered. I crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into my arms. It is all right. I am here. But it was not all right. The villa shook with noise, the slam of doors, the bark of orders, the distant crack of gunfire outside the gates. Arya buried her face against my chest, trembling. Natalia entered moments later, her voice calm but urgent. We move, now. She guided us into the hidden passage, the narrow corridor behind the walls. The air was damp and close, the stone pressing in around us. Arya's small hand clung to mine, her rabbit dangling from her other fist. We emerged into the panic room, a chamber lined with steel and stocked with supplies. The heavy door shut behind us with a thud that reverberated through my bones. Natalia checked the locks, then turned to me. Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone but me or Mr. Moretti. You are leaving? My voice cracked. She nodded once. He will need me. And then she was gone, the door sealing us inside. The silence was deafening. I held Arya close, rocking her gently, murmuring reassurances I barely believed. My heart hammered, my ears straining for sounds beyond the steel walls. The distant echoes of gunfire reached us still, muffled but unmistakable. Minutes felt like hours. Arya's breathing steadied against me, though her small body remained tense. Then, at last, silence fell. The door opened, and Damien stood there. His shirt was torn at the sleeve, his face shadowed with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with victory. Papa! Arya cried, leaping into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. For a moment, the weight of war slipped away, and he was only a father holding his daughter safe. Then his gaze lifted to me. Our eyes locked, and I saw everything in that look: fury, relief, possession, and something deeper, something dangerous. You did well, he said quietly. You kept her steady. My throat tightened. What happened? His jaw clenched. Romano sent men. They will not return. The finality in his tone chilled me, but I said nothing. Arya clung to him, her face pressed to his chest, safe for now. And I knew, with bone-deep certainty that this was only the beginning. The war was here, and we were already in the center of it. The villa did not rest after the attack. The blood had been cleaned from the stones, the gates reinforced, the halls swept for traces of intrusion, yet the air remained heavy, charged with the scent of fear and iron. The men moved like ghosts through the corridors, their eyes sharper, their hands always near their weapons. Arya clung to me more tightly than before. She had not spoken of the gunfire or the shouts, but I saw it in her eyes, the way they flicked to the windows, the way her hand sought mine in every room. She smiled bravely when her father looked at her, but when she thought no one was watching, her face was pale with unspoken questions. Damien himself was altered, though he hid it well. His presence filled every corner of the house, but his silences were deeper, his gaze colder. The scar along his jaw seemed sharper under the morning light. He carried himself like a man who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. It was Natalia who found me first. She entered the music room where Arya was practicing scales and drew me aside, her voice quiet but firm. "He will want to see you." I followed her through the halls, each step echoing against the marble. The study door was already open. Damien stood near the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind him. Outside, the sea churned, waves colliding with the cliffs as though trying to break the stone itself. "You wanted to see me?" I said, my voice unsteady. He turned, his eyes finding mine with the weight of inevitability. "You saw last night what this is. Romano is no longer circling. He is striking." "Yes," I whispered, "and he will keep striking." Damien nodded once. "That is why things must change. For Arya, for you." I braced myself. "What do you mean?" "You cannot stay here," he said simply. "Not like this. The villa is strong, but it has become a target. Romano will bleed himself against these walls if he must. I will not allow Arya to live as prey in her own home." My breath caught. "So what will you do?" His jaw tightened. "I will send her away." The words cut me deeper than I expected. Away? Where? To a place Romano cannot reach. To men I trust more than myself. For a time, he stepped closer, his voice low, each word heavy with finality. "And you will go with her." The ground shifted beneath me. "Me?" "Yes." His gaze held mine unflinching. "She will not go without you. And I will not send her into the world without the one person she trusts completely." My heart thudded painfully. "And you?" "I stay," he said. "This is my war. It is not hers. It is not yours. It is mine." I shook my head, my voice breaking. "She needs her father." "She needs to live," Damien replied. "And she cannot if she is in my shadow when the bullets come." The fire in his words silenced me. I turned away, staring at the map spread across his desk, the red marks of ports and routes and strongholds. "She will hate you for sending her away." "She will forgive me when she grows old enough to understand," he said quietly, "if I live to see that day." His words made my chest ache. "And if you do not?" He looked at me then, his eyes stripped of their armor. "Then you will tell her who I was. Not the stories men whisper, not the name that makes them tremble. You will tell her that I loved her more than anything in this world." The rawness of his voice pierced me. For the first time, I saw not the Mafia king, but a father begging for the impossible for his child to be safe in a world that would never allow it. Silence fell between us, broken only by the relentless crash of waves. Finally, he straightened, the mask sliding back into place. "You will leave in 2 days. Be ready." Ethan. I left the study with my chest tight, my heart heavy with questions that had no answers. When I returned to Arya, she looked up from her piano with hopeful eyes. "Was Papa angry?" "No," I said softly, forcing a smile. "He was worried." She frowned. "About me?" "Yes, always about you." She accepted that, returning to her scales, but the weight of Damien's decision pressed down on me. 2 days. 2 days before, I would be pulled further from the life I had known, tethered to a child who saw me as her anchor, and separated from the man whose shadow I had begun to live inside. That night, sleep eluded me. I stood at the balcony, staring at the sea, listening to the waves pound the cliffs. The salt air stung my lungs, but it was nothing compared to the ache inside me. When I turned, Damien was there. I had not heard him enter. He leaned against the doorframe, his presence filling the room. His eyes were dark, his face unreadable. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking. "Sleep is for men who are not at war." I swallowed hard. "And what about peace? Do men like you ever find it?" His gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. "Peace is not given, it is taken. But men like me rarely keep it." For a moment, the mask cracked. He reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek, rough fingers startlingly gentle. My breath caught, my body frozen in the pull of him. Then he pulled back, his eyes shuddering once more. "2 days," he said softly. "Be ready." He left as silently as he had come, and I stood there trembling, my skin still burning from his touch, my heart breaking with a truth I could no longer deny. I did not want to leave him behind. 2 days. The time Damien had given me passed like water through my hands, both endless and fleeting. The villa prepared in silence, the staff moving with careful efficiency, Natalia orchestrating every detail as though the act of departure itself was a battle plan. Guards were doubled, vehicles inspected, routes memorized. It was as though the house held its breath, waiting for the moment the gates would open and expose us once more to the world outside. Arya was the only one untouched by the tension, at least on the surface. She hummed as she packed her small bag, folding clothes with childlike clumsiness, tucking her rabbit into the center as though it were the most precious treasure. Yet beneath her excitement, I saw flickers of unease. She glanced often at the door, as though expecting her father to appear and tell her the truth she had not yet guessed. He did not. Damien kept his distance during those 2 days. I saw him only once, in the corridor outside the study. He was speaking in low tones to Enzo, his expression grave, his hands tight at his sides. When his eyes met mine, I thought for a moment he would stop, would say something. Instead, he turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the villa, as though he could not trust himself to speak. The night before our departure, I lay awake in my bed, the sound of waves colliding with the cliffs below louder than ever. The air smelled of salt and smoke, and every creak of the old villa made me start. I thought of Chicago, of the diner, of the narrow apartment where I had once counted pennies. It felt like another lifetime, another woman's story. Mine had ended the night I found Arya on the sidewalk. Since then, I had been living in someone else's tale, one written in blood and shadow. The morning came pale and cold. Natalia knocked sharply at my door before the sun had fully risen. "It is time. I dressed quickly and joined her in the hall, my bag slung over my shoulder. Arya was already there, her rabbit clutched in her arms, her eyes bright with excitement that barely masked fear. She reached for my hand immediately. "Where is Papa?" she asked. "He will meet us before we go," Natalia answered, her voice steady but softer than usual. We moved through the corridors together, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the marble. Guards flanked us, their presence a reminder of the danger pressing in on every side. Damien was waiting in the grand hall. He stood tall, dressed in a dark coat, his expression carved from stone. Yet when Arya ran to him, his mask cracked. He bent, gathering her into his arms, holding her as though he could fuse her to him. "You will be safe," he murmured against her hair. "I do not want to go," she whispered back, her voice breaking. "You must," Damien said, his tone both gentle and firm. "For now, only for now." He kissed her forehead, then set her down, his eyes flicking to me. For a long moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of us standing on opposite sides of an unspoken truth. "Take care of her," he said. "I will," I promised, though the words felt fragile compared to the weight of what he asked. His eyes softened, just for a moment, and then the mask returned. "Go, the cars are waiting." The ride down the winding road was silent. Arya leaned against me, clutching her rabbit. her gaze fixed on the passing hills and olive groves. Natalia sat opposite us, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning every turn. Guards followed in the second SUV, their presence both comfort and reminder. At the private airstrip, the jet waited. The engines hummed, a low growl of inevitability. Arya clung to my hand as we climbed the steps. I looked back once, hoping to see Damien standing there, watching. But the road behind us was empty. Inside, the jet was quiet, sterile. Arya pressed her face to the window, silent now, her small shoulders tense. Natalia sat near the front, already on her phone, murmuring instructions in Italian. I buckled Arya's belt, then my own, my chest tight with the enormity of what we were doing. As the plane lifted into the sky, Sicily shrinking below us, Arya whispered, "Do you think Papa will be lonely without us?" I brushed her hair back gently. "Yes, but he will be strong, for you." She nodded. Though her eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. Hours passed in uneasy silence. The world outside the windows shifted from the blue of sea to the pale stretch of clouds, endless and cold. I sat with my thoughts, each one heavier than the last. I had chosen this, yet I could not shake the image of Damien standing in the villa, his eyes holding mine as though he had already known what my answer would be. When the plane landed, the sun was setting over rolling hills. Natalia led us into a waiting car, the route already secured. We drove through narrow roads bordered by vineyards, the air filled with the scent of earth and grapes. The safe house was nothing like the villa, smaller, humbler, but fortified in its own way. Stone walls, narrow windows, guards at every entrance. Inside, the rooms were simple but clean, a stark contrast to the grandeur we had left behind. Arya wandered through the house, her rabbit in hand, her steps slower than usual. "It is not home," she said softly. "No," I agreed. "But it is safe." That night, after she had fallen asleep in the small bed provided for her, I sat by the window of my own room. The vineyard stretched into the distance, the stars sharp against the dark sky. The silence here was different, less heavy, but not free. Natalia knocked once and entered. She studied me for a long moment, then said, "You did well. She trusts you. That matters more than anything." "Do you trust me?" I asked. Her lips curved faintly, though not into a smile. "I trust that Mr. Moretti would not place his daughter with anyone unworthy. And that is enough." She left me with that, her footsteps fading down the hall. I sat alone, the weight of the day pressing down, the ache of separation burning in my chest. I thought of Damien, his eyes, his voice, the way he had touched my cheek as though branding me with his claim. And I knew then that leaving him behind had not freed me. It had bound me tighter. Because no matter how far we traveled, no matter how many walls or guards stood between us and the world, I was already his. The safe house was quiet, too quiet. After the constant hum of the villa, the footsteps of guards, the echo of voices down long corridors, the endless crashing of waves against the cliffs, the silence here pressed against me like a weight. The house itself was modest by comparison, though still far larger than anything I had ever known before Damien. Thick stone walls kept out the wind. The narrow windows framed the rolling vineyards beyond. It was meant to be a sanctuary, but sanctuaries are built for peace, not for hiding. And what we carried with us was not peace. It was fear disguised as safety. Arya felt it too, though she tried to hide it. On our first morning here, she padded into the kitchen in her socks, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide as she surveyed the unfamiliar space. The breakfast Natalia had ordered was set neatly on the table, bread, fruit, cheese, but Arya only picked at it. "Do you like it here?" she asked suddenly. I hesitated. "It is different. It does not smell like home," she said, wrinkling her nose. "It smells empty." She was right. The villa had smelled of polished wood, of old stone, of flowers from the garden, and smoke from the fireplaces. This house smelled of dust and stone, faintly of oil from the lamps. Empty, like she said. Natalia kept us on a strict routine. Arya's glucose checks were punctual, her meals measured, her lessons continued under the watchful eye of a hired tutor. I stayed by her side through it all, as much her anchor here as I had been at the villa. But at night, when the lessons ended and the halls grew still, the weight of absence fell heavier. "Do you think Papa is safe?" Arya whispered one evening as I tucked her into bed. "Yes," I said quickly. "But you do not know," she replied, her eyes sharp for a child. I brushed her hair back. "I know he is strong, and he would do anything to protect you." She sighed and hugged her rabbit closer. "I wish he was here." I kissed her forehead and whispered, "So do I." When she slept, I found myself wandering the narrow halls, listening to the creak of wood and the distant shuffle of guards outside. The safe house might have been secure, but it was not impregnable. And every night I wondered if Romano's reach could stretch even here. On the third day, a phone arrived. A sleek black device placed in my hands by Natalia without explanation. "Only one number is programmed," she said. "His." My heart leapt, though I forced my face to remain still. "And I am supposed to call him?" "Only when necessary. He will call you when he can." That night, after Arya had fallen asleep, the phone lit up on the nightstand. My pulse raced as I answered. "Claire." His voice was low, steady, carrying across the miles with the same weight as if he stood before me. I swallowed hard. "You are alive." A faint pause. "You doubted it?" "Yes," I admitted. "Every moment." He exhaled, the sound rough, tired. "I do not have long. Romano pushes harder than expected. But you are safe?" "Yes, Arya is steady. She misses you." There was silence on the line, heavy and raw. Then his voice softened, breaking the steel just slightly. "Tell her I think of her every hour. Tell her she is my reason." My throat tightened. "And what about me?" Another pause, longer this time. His reply came low, deliberate. "You are the one who keeps her alive, which means you are mine too. Do not forget that." Before I could answer, the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my chest tight, my pulse uneven. His words had seared into me both claim and promise, mine too. I wanted to tell myself it was only protection, only necessity, but the ache in my chest betrayed me. The days stretched, each one blending into the next. Arya adjusted slowly, though she still asked for her father daily. We painted in the afternoons, her childish sketches of the villa filling page after page. She insisted on drawing Damien at the head of every picture, tall and strong, always watching. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the vineyards, Natalia joined me on the balcony. She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the cooling air. "You care for them," she said simply. "Yes," I whispered. "It will destroy you if you are not careful." I turned to her, startled. "What do you mean?" "Being close to him," she replied, exhaling smoke. "It is like standing too near a fire. It warms you. It draws you. But eventually, it burns. No one leaves his world untouched. Not even you." Her words settled heavy in my chest, but I had no reply. That night, I lay awake, listening to the stillness of the safe house, the faint chirp of crickets outside. I thought of Damien's voice over the phone, of the way he had said mine too, of the way my body had betrayed me at his nearness. And I realized that no matter how far we had traveled, no matter how many walls surrounded us, I was not escaping him. I was being drawn deeper, tethered by something I could neither fight nor name. The safe house was supposed to protect us, but all it did was remind me how much I needed him near, and that was the most dangerous truth of all. The safe house walls were strong, but they could not keep out anticipation. Each day stretched longer than the one before, each night heavier. Arya asked for her father every morning when she opened her eyes, and every night before she drifted to sleep. I answered the same way each time. He is fighting, but he will come. Yet even as I said the words, I wondered if I was making promises I had no right to give. On the fifth night, the phone lit again. My heart lurched before I even touched it. "Claire," Damien's voice came, low and rough. "You are alive," I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Yes," he replied, and I am coming. The silence that followed was deafening. I gripped the phone tighter. Here? To us? Yes, he said. Tomorrow. The line went dead before I could answer. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat awake long after the house had gone silent, listening to the ticking of the old clock in the hall, to the faint stirrings of guards outside. My heart ached with equal parts dread and relief. Damien coming here meant danger would follow, but it also meant I would see him again. Morning dawned with golden light spilling across the vineyards. Arya burst into the kitchen with an energy I had not seen in weeks. She spun in circles, her rabbit clutched in her hand. "Papa is coming," she cried. "I dreamed it last night." I forced a smile, but inside, the dream had already taken shape in me too. By midday, the safe house hummed with preparation. Natalia's orders were crisp, her eyes sharper than I had ever seen them. Extra guards took their positions at the gates, weapons gleaming in the sunlight. The atmosphere thickened with anticipation, every corner vibrating with watchfulness. The sound of engines finally broke the silence. Black SUVs rolled up the dirt road, their polished bodies out of place against the rustic vineyards. The moment they stopped, my breath caught. Damien stepped out first. He wore a dark coat over a tailored suit, the scar along his jaw sharp in the sunlight. His presence was the same as always, commanding, unshakable, but there was something heavier in the way he carried himself. A man who had walked through fire to stand here. Arya shrieked with joy and ran to him, her small feet pounding the gravel. He bent, catching her in his arms, holding her against his chest, as though she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. "Papa," she whispered, burying her face against his neck. "My little one," he murmured, his voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. "You are safe, you are safe." I stood frozen near the doorway, my heart racing. His eyes lifted then, finding mine across the courtyard. The world stilled in that moment. Everything, the guards, the house, the sunlight faded, leaving only the pull between us. He approached slowly, Arya still clinging to him. When he stopped before me, his gaze searched mine. Unreadable. "You kept her steady," he said. "I tried," I whispered. "You did more than try," he replied. The silence between us stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Natalia cleared her throat, reminding us that the world had not stopped. Damien nodded once and carried Arya inside. The rest of the day unfolded in strange rhythms. Arya was glued to her father, showing him every corner of the safe house, every picture she had drawn in his absence. He listened with infinite patience, his large hand resting gently on her head, his eyes soft in a way that stripped him of his armor. But when she was not looking, when she ran ahead or turned away, his gaze found mine. Each time it lingered. Each time it burned. That evening, after Arya had finally fallen asleep in her bed, Damien asked me to meet him on the balcony. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky. The vineyards stretched endlessly below us, silvered by moonlight. He stood with his back to me at first, his shoulders broad, his hands gripping the stone railing. "You should not have come," I said softly. He turned, his eyes locking on mine. "And leave you here alone with her, while Romano circles closer every day? Never. And so, Romano will follow you," I pressed. "Your presence brings danger." "My presence brings protection," he countered. His voice dropped lower, fiercer. "Do you think walls and guards would keep him from what he wants? It is me he fears. Not stone, not steel, me." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "And what about us? What if his hate for you swallows us too?" Damien stepped closer, the heat of him pulling me in. "Then I will burn before I let it touch you." His words shook me, both terrifying and intoxicating. The air between us crackled, alive with tension I could no longer deny. I wanted to step back, to put distance between us, but my body betrayed me. I said, "Claire," he said, my name on his lips, both a warning and a promise. You think you can stand apart from this, from me, but you are already inside it. You have been since that night. His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against my cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, but it burned through me like fire. My breath caught, my pulse racing. Damien, I whispered, but I did not move away. His eyes searched mine, the darkness in them tempered by something raw, something dangerous. For a moment, I thought he might close the distance between us. But then he pulled back, his jaw tightening, the mask returning. It is late, he said, his voice rough. Go inside. Rest. Pressure. I obeyed, though every step away from him felt heavier than the last. That night, lying awake in the quiet of the safe house, I pressed my fingers to my cheek where his hand had been. His touch lingered like a brand, searing into me a truth I could no longer ignore. I was his, whether I admitted it or not. And the more I tried to fight it, the deeper it bound me. The next morning dawned calm, but it was the kind of calm that felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The vineyards outside stretched golden under the rising sun, yet the safe house buzzed with restless energy. Damien's presence altered everything. Guards stood straighter, moved quicker, eyes sharper. Even Natalia seemed more tense, as though she knew the storm was closer now that he was under this roof. Arya was jubilant. She barely left her father's side, trailing him through the kitchen, the courtyard, the small library. She clutched his hand constantly, as if afraid he would vanish if she let go. Damien indulged her every request, his patience endless, though beneath the soft smiles he gave her, I could see the shadows tightening around his eyes. By midday, I found myself in the kitchen with Arya, slicing fruit for her snack. She chattered about showing her father the drawings she had made during his absence. I smiled, but my hands were unsteady, the knife pressing harder against the apple than it should have. You are worried, Arya said suddenly, her eyes sharp for someone so young. I just want you to be safe, I admitted. She tilted her head. Papa says, safe is what you make, not what you find. I did not know what to say to that. She returned to humming softly, arranging her crayons on the table. Later that afternoon, Natalia called me aside. We stood in the narrow hall outside the guard post. Her face was unreadable, her voice low. His being here is dangerous. Romano will not miss this opportunity. My chest tightened. Then why did he come? Because he could not stay away, she said simply. For her, and perhaps for you. The words startled me. I wanted to argue, to deny, but the truth was too close. Natalia's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she had read the thought straight from me. Do not forget, Claire, she said. The closer you stand to fire, the more it burns. Before I could respond, the crackle of a radio interrupted. One of the guards spoke quickly in Italian, urgency sharp in his tone. Natalia stiffened, her hand already near her weapon. What is it? I asked. She turned to me, her face grim. Unfamiliar vehicles, approaching fast. The air shifted instantly. The calm shattered. Guards moved with precision, taking their positions. The house itself seemed to tense, its silence broken by the heavy slam of doors, the thud of boots. I ran to Arya, who was still in the kitchen. She looked up at me, confused by my urgency. Claire? Come with me, I said firmly, taking her hand. We have to go. Damien appeared in the doorway before we could move further. His eyes were dark, his coat already in his hand. Natalia told you? Yes, I said. Then you know what to do. He crouched, looking into Arya's frightened eyes. Stay with Claire. Do not let go of her hand. Understand? She nodded, trembling. He stood, his gaze locking on mine. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us. Keep her steady, no matter what you hear. I will, I whispered. He touched Arya's cheek once, briefly, then turned and disappeared into the hall, his voice sharp as he barked orders to his men. Natalia led us quickly to the hidden passage, the narrow corridor behind the walls. My breath came fast, my hand gripping Arya's tightly as we moved through the dark, her small body pressed against me, her rabbit clutched in her other arm. The safe house trembled with noise, the growl of engines, the shouts of men, the distant crack of gunfire. Arya whimpered, but I whispered into her hair, "It is all right. I am here. Just hold on." We reached the panic room. Natalia checked the locks twice before turning to me. "Stay here until I return. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Mr. Moretti." And then she was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Arya's breathing came fast and shallow. I wrapped my arms around her, rocking her gently, murmuring nonsense just to fill the space. Time stretched. The gunfire outside rose and fell, muffled by the thick stone but still present, still real. I pressed my forehead against the cold wall, praying without words. At last, footsteps pounded outside. The locks turned and the door swung open. Damien stood there, his shirt torn, his face streaked with sweat and smoke. His eyes went first to Arya. "Papa," she cried, running into his arms. He lifted her, holding her so tightly I thought he might never let go. "You are safe," he whispered fiercely. "That is all that matters." Then his gaze lifted to me. Our eyes met, and the world seemed to tilt. Relief, fury, possession all burned in his stare. "You kept her steady," he said. His voice was rough, but beneath it was something raw, something almost vulnerable. I swallowed hard. "Always." He nodded once, then turned, carrying Arya back toward the hall. Guards followed us, their faces grim but victorious. The attack had been repelled, but the danger was closer than ever. That night, after Arya finally fell into exhausted sleep, Damien summoned me to the balcony. The stars blazed above us, cold and bright. He stood with his back to me, his hands braced against the stone railing. "You see now," he said quietly, "why I sent you away, why I wanted you far from this." I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "But you came anyway." He turned, his eyes locking on mine, fierce and unyielding, "because I could not stay away." The air between us burned with everything unspoken. I felt it in the heat of his gaze, in the way the night seemed to hold its breath around us. "Damien," I whispered, though I had no words beyond his name. He closed the distance in a single step, his hand brushing against mine, rough and warm. "You think you can stand apart from me," he said, his voice low. "But you cannot. You are already inside this, inside me." I should have stepped back. I should have reminded him of Arya sleeping just beyond the walls. But I did not, because for the first time, I understood the truth. I did not want to. The safe house was restless in the days after the attack. Guards patrolled with heavier steps, radios crackled at all hours, and the atmosphere carried the sharp tang of gun oil and tension. Even when the vineyards outside swayed peacefully in the sun, the men inside moved as if the air itself had teeth. Damien remained a constant presence, and with him came both reassurance and unease. His shadow filled every room he entered. His voice, low and commanding, carried through the stone walls as he spoke with his men, his words clipped and precise. When he was with Arya, the hardness cracked, revealing the father beneath the warlord. He read to her in the evenings, his deep voice softening with every page, and for those moments, the house seemed less haunted. But when his eyes found me, the air shifted. On the third morning after the attack, I found him in the courtyard. He stood with Enzo and Luca, their heads bent over a table, scattered with maps and photographs. The scar on Damien's jaw caught the morning light, the sharpness of his expression making it clear that whatever decisions he was making would draw blood. When he noticed me, his men fell silent. He dismissed them with a single look. They obeyed instantly, leaving us alone beneath the olive trees. "You should not be here," he said, his tone neither harsh nor kind, simply true. I swallowed. "Where else would I be?" "Far from this," he replied. His gaze was steady, but something darker flickered in it. "I sent you away for a reason, and still Romano reached for you. You came." I countered, my voice softer than I intended. "If you wanted me far, you should not have." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, the weight of him impossible to ignore. I came because I will not let him take what is mine. The word mine burned through me, equal parts claim and warning. I wanted to argue, to tell him I was not his to keep, but the words tangled in my throat. The truth was too dangerous to speak. Part of me did not want to be free of him. That evening, Arya begged her father to walk with us through the vineyards. The three of us moved along the dirt path, the air warm with the scent of earth and grapes. Arya darted ahead, chasing butterflies, her laughter echoing through the rows of vines. You make her happy, Damien said suddenly. His voice was quiet, meant only for me. She is a child, I replied. Children find happiness where they can. He shook his head. No. She is more watchful than she should be. She has seen too much. Yet with you, she forgets. That is rare. That is why you are important. The words cut deeper than I expected, not because of the praise, but because of what lay beneath it. A recognition of the bond that tethered us all together, fragile and undeniable. When Arya ran back to us, Damien lifted her effortlessly, settling her on his shoulders. She laughed, her small hands gripping his hair. For a moment, I saw not the man feared across continents, but simply a father carrying his daughter, the corners of his mouth curved in quiet joy. That night, after Arya was asleep, Damien called me to the library. The fire burned low, shadows flickering across the stone walls. He stood by the window, his glass untouched, his gaze fixed on the stars. Romano will not stop, he said. He sees Arya as leverage. He sees you as weakness. That is why he will keep coming. And what will you do? I asked. End it, he replied. His tone was calm, but it carried the finality of a death sentence. There will be no peace until Romano is ash. I shivered. And what if you fail? He turned then, his eyes locking on mine, fierce and unyielding. I do not fail. Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. I wanted to look away, but I could not. His eyes held me like chains, pulling me closer even as my mind screamed for distance. Finally, I whispered, and what about us? What happens to us in this war of yours? His gaze softened, just slightly. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. You survive, because I will not allow anything else. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. His hand lifted then, hesitated before brushing against mine. The touch was brief, almost cautious, but it set my skin alight. Damien, I whispered, his name both warning and plea. He pulled back quickly, his jaw tightening. It is late. Go to her. She sleeps better when you are near. Dismissal. Protection. Both at once. I obeyed, but as I left the library, my body still hummed from the heat of his nearness. That night, as I sat in the chair beside Arya's bed, I watched her chest rise and fall, her small fingers curled around her rabbit. She was peaceful, oblivious to the shadows circling outside her world. I envied her, and yet I knew that everything I did, everything I endured, was for this peace she carried in her dreams. But as I leaned back in the chair, one truth refused to leave me. Damien Moretti was not just the man who kept her alive. He was the man who had wrapped me into his war, into his fire. And the closer I stood to him, the more I realized Natalia was right. Fire does not warm forever. It burns. And I was already burning. The safe house seemed to grow smaller with each passing day. Its walls were strong, its guards disciplined, but confinement had a way of turning security into suffocation. Arya was restless, her energy bubbling without an outlet. She practiced piano, read her books, painted pictures of butterflies and olive trees, but every so often she would stop, staring at the door with a longing she could not hide. Papa will let us go home soon, she said one morning as I checked her glucose. I forced a smile. Yes, when it is safe. Her small brow furrowed. What if it is never safe? The words made my hands falter. I kissed the top of her head instead of answering, because no promise I gave her would carry the weight of truth. That afternoon, Damien gathered his men in the study. I stayed near the door with Natalia, listening as the voices rose and fell in Italian. Maps were spread across the table, marked with red lines, circles, and names I did not recognize. But one name came often enough for me to understand: Romano. Damien's voice was steady, sharp, the kind of tone that cut through doubt. He grows bold. He believes me distracted. He believes the girl makes me weak. That is his mistake. Enzo leaned forward, his thick arms resting on the table. He has men in Palermo, in Catania. He wants the ports. He wants to cut the routes. Damien nodded. Then we cut him first. The room hummed with grim agreement. Later, when the men dispersed, Damien remained, his hand pressed against the edge of the table, his gaze fixed on the map. The firelight caught the scar along his jaw, deepening the shadows on his face. I hesitated before speaking. You talk about ending him as though it were inevitable. He looked up slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. It is. My breath caught. And what if he reaches us first? Then he dies faster, Damien replied, his voice low, final. The weight of his certainty pressed against me, both terrifying and magnetic. He lived in absolutes. For him, survival was not chance, it was choice, sharpened into a weapon. That evening, I walked the vineyards with Arya, the air heavy with the scent of ripening grapes. She ran ahead, her laughter bright against the twilight. For a moment, I let myself breathe, let myself pretend the world was simple again. But the illusion shattered when headlights cut through the dusk. A guard shouted, his voice sharp with alarm. The sound of engines roared closer, too close. Inside, Natalia barked, her hand already reaching for her weapon. I grabbed Arya, pulling her against me as we sprinted back toward the safe house. Her small heart pounded against my chest, her breath ragged with fear. Behind us, the growl of vehicles grew louder. The heavy doors slammed shut just as the first shots rang out. The sound was deafening, bullets cracking against stone, men shouting in Italian. I pressed Arya against the wall, shielding her with my body as the safe house trembled around us. Damien appeared, his coat already off, his weapon in his hand. His eyes burned like coals. To the passage, he ordered. Natalia moved instantly, guiding us toward the hidden corridor. But Arya's voice cracked with panic. Papa! Damien crouched, gripping her small face in his hands. His voice softened for her alone. Go with Claire. I will come. Tears welled in her eyes. Promise? I promise, he said. She clung to him fiercely before Natalia pulled us away. I carried her through the narrow stone corridor, the walls pressing in on us. Behind, the gunfire grew louder, closer, echoing like thunder. We reached the panic room. Natalia sealed the door, her face carved from steel. Stay here, she said. Do not open it unless it is me or him. And then she was gone. Arya buried her face against me, trembling. I held her tight, murmuring reassurances even as fear clawed at my chest. The sounds of war echoed faintly through the steel shouts. Gunfire, the rumble of engines, minutes stretched into eternity. At last, silence fell. The locks turned. The door swung open. Damien stood there, his shirt torn, blood smeared across his arm, but his eyes were alive, fierce. Arya launched herself into his arms, sobbing. He held her close, his large hand cradling the back of her head. You are safe, he whispered, his voice rough. Always safe. Then his gaze lifted to me. Our eyes locked, and the world seemed to narrow. He stepped forward, still holding his daughter, but his stare burned into me. You kept her steady, he said again, the same words he had spoken after every storm. I swallowed hard. Because I had to. His eyes softened, just slightly. No, because you chose to. That night, after Arya finally drifted into exhausted sleep, Damien summoned me to the balcony. The vineyards lay silent under the moon, their beauty a cruel contrast to the violence of the day. He stood with his back to me, his posture rigid. You see now, Romano will not stop. He will keep sending men until one of us is ash. I stepped closer, my voice trembling. And if it is you? He turned then, his eyes fierce. It will not be me. Silence stretched. The night air wrapped around us, heavy with salt and smoke. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice low. I told you once you were mine. You still do not understand what that means, but you will. Before I could answer, he brushed past me, disappearing into the shadows of the safe house. I stood frozen under the moonlight, my skin burning where his nearness had lingered. And I knew with terrifying certainty that this was no longer just survival. This was a war, and I was no longer outside of it. I was at its center. The safe house was never quiet again after the attack. Even when the gunfire had faded, even when the bodies had been taken away and the blood scrubbed from the stones, the air carried its memory. Guards no longer moved with casual vigilance. They moved like men who expected death at every corner. Natalia barely slept, her presence constant, her voice sharper than steel. And Damien carried the storm inside him. He did not rest, he did not yield. He spent his nights bent over maps and dossiers, his days on calls spoken in clipped Italian, his tone a blade honed against stone. His men came and went like shadows, bearing news that only seemed to harden him further. I tried to keep Arya steady amid the unrest. We painted, we read, we walked the vineyards when it was safe. But she clung to me tighter now, her laughter briefer, her eyes searching for her father with unspoken questions. Papa will fix it, she whispered one night as I tucked her in. He always does. I kissed her forehead, though my chest ached. Yes, he will. But the truth was heavier. Damien was preparing not just to fix the problem, but to end it completely, brutally. And that meant more blood. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Natalia came to me. She spoke in a low voice, her eyes darting toward the study door where Damien and his men were gathered. He is preparing to strike, she said simply. I felt my stomach twist. Strike? How? Her expression did not change. Romano believes he can press here on Sicilian soil. Damien will remind him whose soil this is. It will not be subtle. My breath caught. And what does that mean for us? It means you must be ready, she said. If he moves, Romano will retaliate, and you and the girl are always the prize he seeks. Her words echoed in me long after she left. I stared at the study door, the muffled rumble of men's voices within, and felt the truth settle like stone in my chest. Later that night, when the villa had fallen into uneasy quiet, Damien summoned me. He stood at the desk, the scar along his jaw stark in the firelight, his hands braced on the map spread before him. You know what I am planning, he said. Not as a question. I nodded, my throat dry. Natalia told me. Then you know I cannot wait any longer. Every day I stand still. Romano grows bolder. Every day I let him breathe. He edges closer to her. His eyes burned into mine, fierce and unyielding. I will not allow it. I hesitated before speaking. And if you fail? I do not fail, his voice cut like steel. I flinched, but his gaze softened slightly. You are afraid. You should be. But understand this, Claire fear does not decide me. It sharpens me. I swallowed hard, and us? What happens to us when you go to war? You survive, he said simply. Because I will not allow anything else. The finality in his words both comforted and terrified me. I wanted to argue, to demand more certainty, but I knew there was no certainty in this world. There was only his will, and the shadow of the men who opposed him. The next day, preparations began in earnest. Vehicles were checked, weapons polished, routes mapped with precision. I watched from the courtyard as men moved like soldiers, their faces grim, their eyes hard. The air vibrated with tension, with the promise of violence yet to come. Damien was at the center of it all, a force of gravity pulling everything into orbit. His commands were sharp, his presence unshakable. Yet when Arya ran to him, tugging at his sleeve, he knelt without hesitation, his large hand cupping her small face. Papa, do you have to go? She whispered. Yes, he said softly, his voice breaking for her alone. But I will come back, always back to you. Her eyes shimmered with tears. Promise? I promise, he said. He held her for a long moment, then stood, his face hardening again as he turned back to his men. That night, I found him on the balcony. The stars burned cold above us, the vineyard stretched silent below. He stood with his back to me, his shoulders rigid. "You should be with her," I said softly. "I am with her always," he replied, his voice low. "Even when I am not." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "And what about me?" He turned then, his eyes locking on mine. The fire in them was fierce, but beneath it was something raw, something dangerous. "You are already with me, Claire. You have been since that night." His hand lifted, brushing my cheek. The touch was rough, but it sent heat rushing through me, searing into my skin. "Damien," I whispered, his name both plea and warning. He leaned closer, his voice low, almost breaking. "When this is done, when Romano is ash, there will be nothing left between us, nothing but truth." The words stole my breath. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us, the night air heavy, the stars cold witnesses above. I wanted to pull away, to remind myself of the danger, but my body betrayed me. I stayed. Then, as quickly as it had come, the moment shattered. Natalia appeared at the doorway, her voice firm. "It is time." Damien stepped back, the mask sliding into place. His eyes lingered on mine for one last heartbeat before he turned, disappearing into the shadows with his men. I stood frozen on the balcony, the night pressing around me. Below, the vineyards lay silent, but I knew the silence was only the pause before violence. And as I returned to Arya's room, watching her sleep peacefully, I realized with bone-deep certainty that the war was no longer coming. It was here, and Damien Moretti was about to set it alight. The safe house felt like a cage once Damien and his men left. The heavy doors had shut behind them, the rumble of engines fading into the night, leaving only silence behind. But it was not peace, it was absence, thick and suffocating. Natalia stayed behind with a smaller group of guards, her expression unreadable as ever, but I caught the flicker of tension in her movements. She listened to the radios constantly, the clipped Italian words more code than conversation. I did not ask. I knew the answers would not comfort me. Arya clung to me more than ever. She refused to sleep in her bed alone, insisting instead on curling against me in the narrow cot of my room. She dreamed restlessly, muttering her father's name, her small hands fisting in my shirt as though holding me tethered to her was the only way to keep him tethered too. Days passed, though each one bled into the next with no rhythm, no certainty. I counted them, not by sunlight, but by Arya's checks, by the meals I coaxed her to eat, by the way Natalia's voice sharpened when the radios crackled. On the third night, Arya asked the question I had been dreading. "What if Papa does not come back?" Her voice was small, almost broken. I pulled her into my lap, smoothing her hair back. "He will come back," I said. "You do not know that," she whispered. I closed my eyes. "No, but I believe it, and sometimes believing is enough to hold on to." She nodded, though I knew the answer did not satisfy her. It did not satisfy me either. Later, when she finally slept, I stood at the window. The vineyards stretched dark and endless beneath the stars, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a night bird. My heart ached with the weight of distance, with the knowledge that Damien was out there somewhere, in the thick of violence, while I stood here useless, waiting. On the fourth morning, Natalia entered the kitchen while I was preparing Arya's breakfast. She set her phone on the table. "He wants to speak to you." My hands trembled as I picked it up. "Damien?" His voice was low, graveled by exhaustion, but steady. "Claire." Relief crashed through me. "You are alive." "Yes," he said. "But it is not finished." "Not yet." "Where are you?" "Closer than you think." His words were careful, deliberate. "Do not ask more. Just tell me Arya is steady." "Yes," I said quickly. "She is frightened, but steady. She asks for you every day." There was silence. Then his voice softened, rawer than I had ever heard it. "Tell her I will come back. Tell her I am fighting to make it so." My throat tightened. "And if you cannot?" "I will," he said. No hesitation, no crack in his tone. Because there is no other choice. Before I could reply, the line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone pressed against my ear, his words echoing in me like a vow carved in stone. That evening, I found Natalia outside, smoking in the courtyard. The glow of the cigarette lit her sharp features in the dark. "He sounds like a man who cannot lose," I said. She exhaled slowly, the smoke curling into the air. "Men like him do not believe in losing. But that does not mean it cannot happen." I shivered. 2 more days passed. Then, just before dawn on the 6th morning, the sound came, the growl of engines on the road. My heart leapt, but fear followed close behind. Guards moved instantly to their positions, weapons raised. Natalia's voice cut through the radio, sharp and controlled. The vehicle stopped outside the gates. The air held its breath. Then the door opened, and Damien stepped through. He looked different. His coat was torn, his shirt stained with blood, some his, some not. His face was shadowed with exhaustion, his jaw rough with days of unshaven stubble. But his eyes burned with fire. "Papa," Arya cried, racing across the hall. He caught her, lifting her into his arms despite the weight of fatigue dragging at him. He pressed his face to her hair, breathing her in as though she were the only thing keeping him alive. "You are safe," he whispered. "You are safe." I stood frozen, relief and fear tangling in my chest. When his eyes found mine, the world seemed to tilt. He moved toward me slowly, still holding his daughter. "You kept her steady," he said. I nodded, my voice breaking. "Always." Something raw flickered in his gaze. He reached out, his free hand brushing against mine in the briefest touch, a connection that seared me more than any embrace. Then he turned, carrying Arya upstairs, his steps heavy but unyielding. That night, after she had fallen asleep in his arms, Damien summoned me to the balcony. The stars burned cold above us, the night air sharp with salt and smoke. He stood with his back to me, his hands braced on the stone railing. "It is done," he said quietly. "Romano?" He nodded once. "Ash." My breath caught. "At what cost?" His silence was answer enough. I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "And now? What happens now?" He turned then, his eyes locking on mine, dark and unflinching. "Now the war is mine alone, but you and Arya are free from it." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they twisted like a blade. "Free?" I whispered. "You think we can ever be free of this?" His gaze softened just slightly. He reached for me, his fingers brushing my cheek, rough and tender at once. "You are already mine, Claire. That is not a chain. It is a truth." My breath hitched, my heart pounding. And under the cold blaze of the stars, I knew. Whatever war he fought, whatever blood he shed, I was already bound to him. And there was no undoing it. The days following Romano's fall were heavy with silence, the kind of silence that carried the echo of violence just past. The safe house was no longer under siege, but the tension did not ease. Guards still patrolled with sharp eyes, weapons never far from reach. Natalia's voice was clipped and harsher than ever, as if she trusted peace even less than open war. Damien did not speak of what had happened, not in front of Arya, not in front of me, but the shadows beneath his eyes deepened, and the set of his jaw grew harder. His presence filled the house like a storm cloud, looming and relentless. Arya, however, glowed with relief. She followed her father everywhere, clinging to his hand, curling into his lap, demanding his attention as though she could store up his presence to shield her from the future. He indulged her without question. When she asked him to braid her hair, he tried, fumbling with her braids until she giggled. When she insisted he read her the same fairy tale 3 times in a row, he read without complaint. Watching them together was almost unbearable. The tenderness in his eyes when he looked at her stripped him bare, yet every time his gaze slid to me, it was different, sharper, darker, edged with a pull I could neither resist nor escape. On the 3rd evening after his return, a meeting was called in the dining hall. Men filled the long table, their suits dark, their faces carved with suspicion and loyalty alike. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the low murmur of Italian. Natalia stood like a sentinel near the door, while Enzo and Luca lingered at Damien's side. I stayed in the corner, Aria beside me, her small hand clutched in mine. Damien stood at the head of the table, his voice low but carrying like thunder. Romano is finished. His bloodline is severed. His men have bent the knee or they are gone. The war he began is over. There was a murmur of agreement, but also doubt. An older man leaned forward, his silver hair gleaming in the firelight. And yet, questions remain. The girl, the outsider. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp and dismissive. Damien's gaze followed, hard as steel. Claire Morgan is under my protection, which means she is beyond question. The man smirked faintly. Protection or possession? The room stilled, every eye shifting between Damien and me. My breath caught in my throat. Damien's jaw tightened. Both. The word landed like a blow, silencing the hall. He said it without hesitation, without apology. Both. My chest tightened, my heart racing as the men lowered their gazes, none daring to challenge him further. But the weight of his words pressed against me long after the meeting ended. Later that night, I found him on the balcony again, the stars cold above us, the vineyard stretching dark below. His coat hung open, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his scar catching the moonlight. "You should not have said that," I whispered. He turned, his eyes finding mine. "Said what?" "That I am both protection and possession." His gaze darkened. "It is the truth. It makes me sound like property." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Not property, mine." His voice dropped, low and fierce. "There is a difference." I trembled beneath the weight of it. "And if I do not want to belong to anyone..." His hand lifted, brushing against my cheek, rough and gentle at once. "Then you should have walked away the night you found her, but you did not. You chose to stay. And now you are here, with me." My breath caught. The fire in his eyes burned too close, too consuming. I wanted to step back, but I could not. "You frighten me," I whispered. "And yet you are still here," he murmured. "Why is that, Claire?" I had no answer. Or perhaps I had too many. Before either of us could speak again, the sound of footsteps interrupted. Natalia appeared, her expression unreadable. "There are whispers already," she said. "Romano's allies may be dead, but others will test your strength. They will test her presence as well." Damien's hand dropped, his eyes still locked on mine. "Let them." Natalia's gaze flicked between us, sharp as glass, before she turned and disappeared into the shadows. When Damien finally left the balcony, I remained, my heart still racing, my skin still burning where he had touched me. I stared at the stars, cold and distant, and realized the truth I could no longer deny. I was already bound to him, not by chains, not even by choice, but by something deeper, something far more dangerous. And no matter what came next, there would be no turning back. The whispers came quickly after Romano's fall. Word traveled faster than fire through dry fields, reaching corners of Sicily I had never heard of, and across oceans into the ears of men who measured power in blood. Damien had crushed one enemy, but his victory was not silence, it was invitation. An open throne always draws challengers. The safe house vibrated with this truth. Guards rotated in endless shifts, their footsteps constant in the halls. Natalia's phone never stopped ringing, her clipped Italian responses sharp as blades. Enzo and Luca rarely left Damien's side. Their presence, like shadows, fused to his every movement. Aria sensed it too. She clung tighter than before, though she smiled bravely when her father was near. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Why do they all want to fight Papa?" I brushed her hair back gently. "Because he is strong. And when someone is strong, others test them." Her eyes glistened. "Will he win?" I kissed her forehead. "Always." But in the stillness of my room, I asked myself the same question, and the answer was far less certain. The first test came 3 nights later. We were in the dining hall when the call came. Damien listened in silence, his jaw tight, his hand gripping the phone like it might shatter. When he hung up, the room seemed to tilt around him. "An ally dead," he said simply. His tone carried no surprise, only inevitability. A message. The others murmured, but no one questioned. That night, I found him on the balcony, his coat draped over the stone railing, his shirt open at the collar. The scar along his jaw caught the moonlight, his eyes dark pools of thought. "Another war?" I asked softly. He did not turn. There is no end, only pauses. I stepped closer, my voice trembling. "Then how do we ever breathe?" At that he turned, his eyes locking onto mine. "With you, with her. That is the only way." My breath caught, my body tense under the weight of his words. He stepped closer, the night air thick between us. For a moment I thought he might touch me again, that he might close the distance that had been burning between us since the night we met. But before either of us could speak, Natalia appeared. Her voice was tight. "We have movement on the road, unmarked vehicles." The world snapped back into motion. Damien's expression hardened instantly. He grabbed his coat, his voice sharp. "Get them inside, now." Natalia moved swiftly, guiding me back through the corridors. I found Arya in the library, curled up with a book, unaware of the danger pressing closer. I scooped her into my arms, ignoring her protests. "Claire? What is happening?" "Just a precaution," I lied, my heart pounding. The safe house erupted with noise, the slam of doors, the bark of orders, the distant growl of engines. Natalia led us into the hidden passage, the narrow corridor pressing in on us. Arya clung to me, trembling, her rabbit crushed between us. The panic room closed around us again, the heavy locks sealing us in. Silence stretched, broken only by the faint echoes of gunfire outside. Arya's breathing came fast and shallow. I held her tighter, whispering, "It is all right. I am here. He is here. We are safe." Time blurred. Minutes felt like hours. The noise outside rose and fell. Until finally, silence. When the door opened, Damien filled the frame. His shirt was torn, his hands streaked with blood, but his eyes burned alive. "Papa!" Arya cried, leaping into his arms. He held her close, his large hand cradling her head. "My little one, you are safe, always safe." Then his gaze lifted to me. Our eyes locked, the air heavy with everything unspoken. He stepped closer, still holding his daughter, but his stare cut straight through me. "They wanted to test me," he said, his voice low, rough. "They failed." Relief flooded me, but fear lingered, and they will keep trying. His jaw tightened. "Yes, until none remain." He turned then, carrying Arya back toward her room. But before he disappeared into the hall, his eyes met mine once more, fierce and unyielding. "And when they come for you, Claire, they will learn the same." That night, I sat awake in the chair beside Arya's bed, her small hand curled around mine even in sleep. The safe house was quiet again, but it was not peace. It was the silence of enemies waiting, of shadows gathering beyond the walls. I pressed my forehead against the back of her hand, whispering a vow only the night could hear. "I will keep you steady, no matter what it takes." But in the depths of my heart, I knew the truth. My vow was no longer only to her. It was to him too, and that was the most dangerous vow of all.